I'm having technology issues.
So you better be excited.
I hope so. Oh, really? What's after?
Yeah.
What's?
After all this excitement, you need 2 more hours.
Oh, sweet.
It's an advantage.
Oh, sweet. Well, I will. I brought wine, flaming hoops, and you know, so.
Mims, the University of Management people might have brought stuff.
Actually, I probably shouldn't have mentioned that and just.
When the building burns down.
Right. It's actually a fake fire with the fans and the little leaf and the material.
Lit from underneath. And then it's amazing from a distance how real that is.
Yeah, yeah. I was just watching a YouTube video of these Russians who have a lion, a pet lion, and it keeps attacking their teenage son. And they won't get rid of the lion.
So they're choosing the lion
Over the son, yeah. So the kid is getting.
something as a son.
Yeah, well, you know, I was like, wow, you know, they have their priorities seem to be a little different than mine, but all right.
Just by the number.
One of my serial kids.
That's what I was wondering. That's something.
Yeah. We almost never eat small.
We're moving back to it.
So much so that we could find nothing. Because the boys are all bad. So we just took them. Now I'm sure it was more. If ever we decided we wanted to do something with Millie, but it's
We should soon.
I would say it work all the time. My brain. High five. I wouldn't be a good technician. Technician,
Not really maintenance, just giving my yeah, they got questions. Yeah, well, Danny's waiting this month to come back.
yeah. It's interesting that I work in the same division, in the same, and what happened in that month, and it happened back in my life. We don't care, right? If they just info, yeah, okay. Then he was done. I heard that he might come back. And for that, he gave me a question about when he comes back. I'm not coming back. Oh, and then
I said, we can't do that.
oh, is that the problem?
And it's like,
Yeah, you can do 90-day 10%. Carl Moore, retired, and he did play. Now we're back.
I know, but so I'd actually cleaned up some of my
We get like 90 days of work. It was too young. How old were you?
I don't know the whole story. I just know that they said you had to wait a month and then you come back.
And I'll tell you, in my opinion, in that moment, I guess I'm suggesting I know by saying that, but sometimes
Because I know they're trying to create a position. Which is a great idea.
yeah, we've
Because of the struggles that
we've started with that. Yep. Yeah, being involved with all the technology. Think about
I tried getting it.
on the bus, not on the rail. Yeah, so and we're all So you thought, you know,
It's like, it's totally.
you know, not having the expertise, and not having anything to really opinion on it.
We have your radio.
Yeah, that's
your own news, too.
Yeah.
And the things that we share across Monroe, we put all that together. We have 750. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like, it's always about the
Okay, I know we have a couple of people still coming. One is going to be late, but I did want to go ahead and get started and welcome. We are in the home stretch. This is our second to last class, and we have the pleasure of Andre Koen, who is an energetic presenter, and he is a diversity trainer here in Minnesota. He provides face-to-face and online courses on diversity and education, including leadership development, empowerment training, cross-cultural competence, sensitivity training, racism, and teamwork. He has a weekly blog that includes ideas for controlling, removing, and fighting discrimination. And so let's give a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Andre Koen.
How many people have been in one of the sessions that I've done at our annual diversity conference? TTMS. Anyone been to any of those sessions that I've done? Okay, cool. All right, so no? Okay, cool. I just need to know which of my jokes I can repeat. So I appreciate that. I'm also humbled to be in the company of people who impact lives of people not only in the city, in the cities, but in the state. And so I'm really honored to be in front of you. Hopefully this will be engaging, that we're in a world that is it's very polarized, it seems. And so hopefully I'll give you some skills to kind of blend that polarization a little bit better, both in your professional and personal lives, as well as thinking and give you ways of thinking about how to engage folks that we may see as kids would say, as our ops, right? Kids refer to people who are not like them as their opposites or their ops. I guess they've moved on from cray-cray and I don't know if you, okay, other slang terms. So there's that. But to start, let's do a quick activity. So in front of you are a set of nails, and many of you, this isn't a new opportunity. You may have seen this or participated in this before. But what I'd like for you to do is to take the nails that are on the table and balance all of those nails on the head of one. So take all of those nails that are on your table and balance them on the head of one. You'll also see that there's a block of wood. And if you find it necessary to use a block of wood, please do so. Right? So balance all of those nails on the head of one. all of the nails in the head of one nail.
Can't do it, Sean? Gotta watch somebody else.
Sure. I'll give Chad an opportunity.
Just a couple more minutes.
There you go.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Cool. So what do you think about this process? What do you think about this idea of balancing those nails on the head of one? So when I asked you to do that, what are some of the things that came up for you?
Impossible.
That it's what?
Impossible.
That it's impossible. All right.
It's certainly difficult to find that balance.
It's certainly difficult to find that balance.
That's the trick.
What's the trick? Right?
You really think differently?
Are you asking if the trick is to think differently, or that is what's needed to come up with a solution? Yes. Cool. So first of all, you may not know me that well, but I don't get pleasure from other people's misery. So I certainly would not give you a task that was not possible. I wouldn't give you a task that wasn't possible, because I don't enjoy other people's misery. So why do you think I would particularly start this session off with an exercise like this? Why do you think I would start? I haven't even totally introduced myself or got things from you, but why would I need to start with something like this?
Maybe it's like it's out of our comfort zones a little bit,
To force us out of our comfort zones a little bit.
to demonstrate that there's solutions to things that seem like they're
That there are solutions that we may not even see, right? And it may even appear like there aren't solutions, but we know that there are solutions, right? I'll let you off the hook. One of the reasons I like to start with this is because it gets people to do something that the world outside of these four walls oftentimes does not encourage us to do. And what do you think that thing is? Think, right? Think. And it's funny, when I taught high school, I taught at a charter school in St. Paul, and it was very disheartening because we were teaching our students to think, right? We were cultivating their knowledge, we were empowering them, and then when they went to their job at Target, they did not want them to think. Just do number 47. Do number 48, right? So the world outside of us oftentimes does not encourage us to think. And so stretching that muscle is an important thing to realize. And so the trick isn't that you do or don't know how to do that, but do you even know how to approach it? Right? So I saw people trying different things, right? I saw people looking at other people who were trying things, right? And trying the things that they were trying. Most often we try to talk about that as either failure or copycatting. Anyone ever heard of copycatting, right? And how is that looked on in the majority of American culture? To copycat someone. How do we look at that? It's like some kind of weakness, right? That you can't do it yourself, so you have to rely on someone else. When in fact, that's the only way that we learn how to do things, is through relationships and mimicking other folks. So, so there's that. So I'll give you the solution to that. I will give you the solution to that, so you don't have to fret or worry about that. But before I get to that, I'm really curious. You've had a number of sessions before mine, and what were some of those sessions? Okay, yours is through the mentoring program. So what were some of the sessions that led up to this particular session? Because this is the second to the last one. I think your last one is a capstone, which will be a teach back, right? If I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's news to them.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, or the genie out of the bottle. So what sessions did you have before this one? So change management. And what methods did they use when they talked about change management? Did they use a particular philosophy? Okay.
The phases of change.
Okay, the phases of change. All right. Did they do any Lewin work? Does that name sound familiar? Okay, cool. Just trying to see where you are. All right, so you did some change management stuff. What else? Creative problem solving. And what was the tenor of that particular training? Creative problem solving.
Thinking outside the box, trying to think in different ways.
Okay, thinking outside the box, trying to think in different ways. All right. What was it? There were 2 other sessions. Is that correct? What was the session before?
Going back, probably 3 months.
Yeah, going back to. What's that? The 5 dysfunctions of a team. Leone's work, right? So I have, interestingly enough, I have a little bit of that in here as well as transformational leadership. All right, cool. Did anyone talk about servant leadership at all? That concept of servant leadership? You did? Okay, cool. So those are things that we'll find here. As we're talking about this idea of cultural competence, kind of 2.0 or the next depth or level or phase, however you want to put that, what are you hoping that we will talk about? So when you thought about this session, what were you hoping this session would deal with, talk about, lead you to, you come out of? What were your hopes for this session? And I'm going to write some of those things down so I can. Yeah. No, I think that's interesting because the pink tax, I would also say is a rainbow tax, and one argument, if I can just kind of give you something to kind of think about, is no one pays 23% interest on a car unless they have to. Right? It doesn't make sense to do it unless you have to. So then, what are the contributing factors to that, right? So the idea of a pink tax is not just limited to pinkness. And what I would also suggest is that, and we'll talk about it here. We'll talk about it in this as we talk about the context, because context is important. That many of those people who are lashing out at not understanding that also may be impacted economically in ways that they don't see are connected, but in fact are connected. Right? Because I'm sure that those men are connected to women in some way, sisters, mothers, aunts, and so economically, it's impacting them as well, right? So, and we'll hopefully, Kelly, we'll get some more stuff that you can use that are principles to kind of support people into thinking. The other thing that I think we also need to, and you brought that, this is a really good point, and we'll again talk about this, is what is a power struggle? What's a power struggle? Anybody have teams? Anyone been around teams? So nobody wants to compromise, two opposing ideas. Power struggle. You're going to say, you're about to breathe.
Well, and they both think they're right. I mean, they both think they're right, so they can't agree to disagree. They just still.
Yeah. So when I was a teacher, again, working with students, they would try to engage me in power struggles. Do this. No, I'm not going to do that. Put your feet down. No, I'm not going to. No. And when I was a bad teacher, I would engage in those power struggles. So we would be vying for power until I realized something. In that particular context, I have all the power. I can get a student kicked out, I can give them detention, I can, blah, 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 or I can draw them into the class, make them participate. So I have the power to influence all the stuff. So if I'm struggling with power, then it's actually my problem because I don't recognize what power I have. Right? So when we talk about this idea of that we're debating things, that there is either a right or wrong, I want us to question our own thinking about that, right? So I am, you don't need to know this, but I don't mind sharing it. I am 47 years old, and I know I'm right. I know that I'm right. I have universities that have backed me up and said, he knows this information, he's right. I have thousands of hours of doing this work and research, and I know that I'm right. However, at this stage of my life, I don't need to be right. I'm looking to be effective. So what that might mean is, in some cases, I might look wrong. It may seem like someone is embarrassing me or is using me or being a doormat. Anyone ever heard that expression? And people don't be a doormat. Well, that's interesting because how many of you have doormats? And why do we have doormats? So that once they cross over that doormat, the dirt is left at the threshold and not brought to the next level, right? And so when we talk about, sometimes we don't want to be used to help someone get along to the next level. And so this idea that we can't be doormats. Now, I'm not saying that we take abuse, that we subject ourselves to things that are inhuman or anything like that. But ask yourself, what's the difference between being right and being effective? And how do we create that effectiveness? And I think when we debate things, we oftentimes aren't in that space to be effective. Right? What were some other things that people were hoping we would talk about in this session?
A lot of you talked about activism and getting somebody to the next level. I mean, so being able to just, not let it bother you, the differences in opinion or whatever, and not care to think, I'm like talking about 11-year-old just now emerging with his own independence. We do have those power struggles. So what's the?
Yeah.
So okay, I know I'm right, but I still need you to do something.
Yep.
I still need you to
turn off the Xbox or whatever.
Yep.
And so I'm hoping he will get this.
Yep.
Awesome.
Oh, no, do you?
I have an 11-year-old.
I was going to ask you, what is that book? Do you mind sharing? Because I got a 7.
Have a new kid by Friday.
Have a new kid by Friday. New kid by Friday. So Sue, I'll try to help you with that because that's one of the fundamental frameworks of what we're doing, right? So if I can't share with you how to be effective in being effective, then I'm just soaking up your time. Right?
Well, and that's just one example. I mean, there's obviously other examples in life where we just need to figure out how we do that.
Yeah.
Successfully do that. Because I'm happy to just not argue the whole night.
Yeah.
It's not going to get me anywhere.
No.
But I still need to know how to do it.
Yeah, and so if we can shortcut some of the stuff, because some of the things that we get caught up in are the antics of people's behavior, right? So even in supervising folks, I have found, so I was the affirmative action officer for Anoka County, and I could tell you when I would start getting, I could put it on the calendar, when the rush of discrimination complaints or lack of accommodation complaints would start rolling in. And when do you think that was? Right before review time, right? Why? Because people were being discriminated against, possibly. People weren't getting access to their stuff, possibly. But I also had folks who knew what? That they weren't performing. And so what did they want to do? Do a preemptive strike, right? So let me file this thing, blah, 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 blah. So I had to kind of whittle through those things. And of course, those things were happening. But I also had to recognize the cycle of some of those things, right? Other things folks were hoping we would talk about or deal with. Yes,
I
Chad.
was just looking maybe for a different point of view on, because I saw the diverse workforce heading on the class. And somebody else's point of view on that, besides mine,
Okay.
on all the different things that are happening nowadays. And,
Okay, cool. So I don't know what your view is, so we may actually have the same view, but if we don't, or if you're not getting what you want, poke me and then we'll see if we can get something else, right? So cool, yeah, so we'll look at this idea of the diverse workforce. What is that and why is that important?
but, and all the rules around it, and is it all needed, or are we going overboard in some places, and
Yeah.
maybe it is all needed?
Yeah. So this is what I was saying. I mean, and I'll address part of that right now, right? So I believe that communism is a good system. I believe that socialism is a good system. I believe that free market capitalism is a good system. I also know that the problems with the systems only come when you add people. So on paper, all that stuff just works great. But you add people and it mixes and mucks everything up, right? So we'll kind of talk about how is some of the systems that we've been wrestling with, how are they being mucked up by people, right? And so how do we deal with those people in whatever systems we're in? Cool. Other folks, other things you were hoping we might talk about.
How do we get a diverse workforce? How do we get people to work together?
Yeah. Cool. So how do you use that to your advantage? How do you get people to work together as a group? Cool. Anything else? And as things pop up, please say, Andre, Can you say more about this? Or I was thinking about this. Can we? All right, cool. Um, so these are goals and stuff. Oh, by the way, on your so if you have your smartphone, please keep it out because you may need to use it or you may want to use it. At the top of the presentation, you'll see that there is a URL. If you type that URL, you can ask questions, and I'll see them on the monitor. And if you want the presentation now, if you scan me, you can have a copy of the presentation right on your phone. So there is that. So then there's the objectives and goals and all that kind of stuff, and I'll let you read that kind of stuff on your own. But this is something that if you could write this down, I think this is important. Context is everything. Context is everything. So I walk in. Yes. Oh, it's on the presentation. It's up here. Yep. So I can bring it up. I'll bring it back to it, and it's periodically through the presentation, so you can just scan it. So I walk into this room with privilege and power. I walk into this room with privilege and power. I'm 6'2". I'm African American. I'm a male. I am either lower middle class or upper lower class. I'm a cisgendered male, which means that my biological my biological gender and how I demonstrate that gender are the same. So I'm a cisgendered male. I am heterosexual. I'm male. I am married. I'm a father. I'm a conservative Christian. I don't have a felony. I'm mildly attractive and extremely humble. So all of those things provide me with privilege and power. Now, some of those things, like my degrees, I've earned those things. But there are other things that I haven't earned. And so they give me privilege and power in particular contexts. And so as contexts change, so does the privilege and power that I have associated with that, right? So in your handout, what I'd like for you to do is to just write down what are some of your privileges and some of your power. Where do your privilege and where does your power come from, right? So right on the privilege and power page in your handout. So what are some of your privileges or power? All right, stop right there. I want you to think about contexts. Are there contexts? Is there a context where your privilege or your power could be a liability? So just write down, somewhere liability, right? And where could that privilege or power be a liability? Just write that context. All right, and then also write context hyphen asset. Where are your power and privilege an asset? In what context is that an asset? Cool. What I'd like for you to do is to just take, we'll do about 4 minutes right at your table. Feel free to share your privilege and your power, share where those might be assets, and share where they might be liabilities. We'll take about 4 minutes to do that. You don't have to share what you don't want to share, so share what you would like to share. All right. Sweet. Just 1 minute. Four, three, two, one, and so what? I know I did not give you a long time to have deep discussions, but what did you start to recognize about yourself as you went through talking about your power and privilege, and also talking about context where that could be a liability or an asset? What came up for you as you? Yes.
When we also have in common, we were born into what we were. Middle class, I was probably lower middle class, but I was at a liberal man, I was at a meal, I never wanted something. Versus being born in a different country where you're born like yourself, all over the world, horrible existence. You start off with so much against you, and we didn't choose where we were at. But that was a privilege as well as power, because you don't control it, but it really falls in your lap. So parts of it can't necessarily do anything wrong.
Right. So where you were born is both privilege and power, oftentimes, right? I thank God that I was born in the United States. If I was born someplace else, I thank God for that too, right? So the opportunity to be born is extremely impactful. Simultaneously, I think context is extremely important, right? So what context were you born into? Other things that people noticed about themselves, yes.
I've never thought about my power method as a liability quite so much. I kind of avoid where it actually positions me as opposed to the other, and I think that's definitely an American culture.
Yeah.
Our job is to position ourselves oppositely rather than worrying about it.
Yeah. What might be the dangers in just looking at my positiveness? Huge blind spots, right? So huge blind spots. Why can blind spots be problematic? So you don't know what you don't know, right? And why is that problematic?
You can behave in ways that are either detrimental to others or inadvertently detrimental to yourself.
Yeah, right? So you can behave, act, think, and operate in ways that are detrimental to you as well as those people around you. I mean, just think about the blind spots in the car, if we use that as the metaphor, right? The blind spots can definitely impact you, but you can certainly impact lots of other people. Towards the end of my grandmother's driving career, she was so afraid that she stopped looking when she would change lanes, right? Her fear, right? And she's operating, so she's causing chaos and mayhem. Now, my grandmother was a gentle, kind woman, never really would have wanted to cause that mayhem, but her fear drove her literally to creating chaos wherever she went because she didn't want to see her blind spots. So the fear of recognizing that you can't see your blind spots drove her to behave in ways that are unlike her. Unlike her. So cool. Yeah, and I really want us to recognize our power and privilege, because if we don't, it becomes a weapon that we use against other people. Well, why didn't you do what I did? Well, I didn't come from the same context. I wasn't born with the same level of power or influence that you were. And so it takes me a little bit longer to do some things. It was funny, I was in an interview, and it was my interview for graduate school. And so they were asking me, when we look at your timeline of your jobs and all there's a lot of stuff that overlaps. And I said, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that overlaps. And they were like, well, that's kind of out of the box. I said, yeah, that's kind of out of the box. I said, because when you're used to living outside of the box, everything you do is outside of the box, right? It's non-traditional. And so a lot of times, even when we talk in our organizations, we're looking for people who have fit in a box that may not necessarily be the box that they've had access to, right? And right now I'm trying to help people think about interviewing differently, right? So why, even asking the question, why are we interviewing people for jobs? Why do we interview people for jobs? Well, we say that it does this, that, and the other thing, but I don't know that, I know that there are actors, Tom, what's his name? The short guy, Tom Cruise, right? So I know that Tom Cruise is a great actor, and I appreciate that he's now doing more of his own stunts, but he is not a spy. So he has learned how to act like a spy in Mission Impossible, right? I wonder if people have learned how to act like an interviewer or an interviewee, but then when they show up on the job, we go, that's not what you did in the interview. Why? Because interviewing is a skill. So sometimes there's not a direct correlation between interviewing and having the right candidate. So why do we interview? And that's just something I'm trying to figure out myself and help organizations to think about. And so in that interviewing process, what kinds of things are you trying to get out of that versus asking these questions? And these people, there are tons of websites that coach you on how to say the right things in those interviews, but sometimes we see people show up differently in the job. But I'm sure not here, not at the council, right? So there's that. So we all have privilege and power, and it's not. One thing I want us to be mindful of is, and I'm not sure if it's a pride or if it's a caring about it, but I want us to recognize that privilege and power, because those are tools that we can use. And we can use them for evil, or we can use them for good, right? So your privilege and power is a tool. Yes?
Yes, with that, my question would be, is do this when you were privileged power, is you against you or someone else? Because I've had that clear why I can become point as well. And where people would assume certain privilege and power, and working there is very diversity, that. And people would come in and use what they perceive to be my social class, all those things, against me with a deep. I haven't tried to do anything. So how do you balance that of you becoming somewhere for how you handle when someone else tries to use it against you, basically assuming that you're going to use it in a way that is negative and harmful to them, but you really haven't done anything with it, and you're cognizant of what you have, so you're intentional. How do you think there's a balance of these where you don't use it in a negative way, but how do you combat when someone else tries to use your own stuff?
Yeah.
In that.
Yep. I think the first way that we do that is by building relationships with folks, right? So, I'm sure there's some folks who've served in the military here. I would imagine, because I've seen lots of movies, I know exactly how the military operates. No. But fraternizing with the enemy is frowned upon, right? I mean, generally we've heard that as something. And why is that? Yeah, it's hard to kill someone that you know, right? And I would say that same kind of, it's hard to be mean to someone that you have a relationship with. I mean, you can do it, you can still do it, right? People do it, but it becomes much more difficult to do that. And if people understand where others are coming from, they're much more likely to give them grace, right? And so I would say in those situations, if there are ways to demonstrate, have built relationships with those folks so that they know where you're coming from. This is, I was doing a session the other day and someone, we were talking about similar things, and they said, well, I'm an ally. And I thought that was an interesting choice of phraseology, right? Because there's a guy named Dr. Dre. Anyone ever heard of him? Okay, so he's part of the hip hop music and whatnot. And if you found out that you had an appendicitis, and you went to the hospital, and Dr. Dre comes in to operate, what would you say about that? Would you have anything to say about that? Yeah. What would you say? Dude, don't touch me, right? Like, but he calls himself a doctor, right? So if I call myself an ally, the question then is, who else is calling me an ally? So a medical doctor, you feel comfortable with them coming and presenting themselves and doing the surgeries and all that stuff. And why is that? Because they're educated, qualified by who? Somebody else, right? So medical school, somebody else has said you have demonstrated your ability to be a doctor. So when we call ourselves an ally, I wonder who else would call you an ally? I don't laugh at my own jokes. Because if they're really funny, what? Other people will laugh, right? No, I do laugh at some of my jokes because they're not funny, and that's the only way I'm going to get a laugh, right? So who is qualifying you to be an ally, right? And so that demonstration of going out and building those relationships, I think that can help with that. There are just plain old mean people who feel so bad about themselves that they'll try to make you feel bad so they feel better. Right? So I don't want to negate that. That also could be something that's happening, right? Yeah, because, context is everything. So where are you? Where are you? So does anyone recognize this map? This was the map of the 2016 election where Donald Trump was victorious. At the top in that corner is the 1980 election where Ronald Reagan was elected president, and there are 4 states that were blue. And typically, when we talk about this, we talk about red being Republican and blue being Democrat, right? So in 1980, can you see the 4 states? It was Minnesota, Georgia, West Virginia, and Hawaii. Can you imagine, do you know why Minnesota and Georgia certainly were blue? Because of the candidates, right? So at least they pulled their own state. Let's give them a hand for pulling your own state, right? So we have this narrative that I want to debunk. Because again, if you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. And I get that from Moana. I don't know if anybody's seen Moana. I love Moana, right? But if you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. And so what's the narrative of this that's been given to us about what this election meant or what this election looks like? That we're divided. That's what people say. We're divided, right?
And if you're not in one of those 4 states, that you voted or that those other states voted overwhelmingly second states, other states voted overwhelmingly yes.
Right. And so when we look at this 2016 election, well, what gets said about this election? This is all about cultural competence. I want to be mindful that I'm still on target.
Well, and it's all state. It's not, the geography isn't state-based. The geography is more urban-based, rural, that comes back to the state by the other states.
So red and blue. So let.
You're a red state, you're not blue, you're red.
Okay.
It's kind of how it's presented.
How it's been presented. Yes, come. What if you're neither red or blue? Okay.
It's establishing what a majority looks like, but not necessarily any nuance.
Uh-huh.
Or uniqueness.
Or uniqueness. There's this this polarized, right? And I don't know if many of you are old enough to remember 3D glasses. You go to see 3D movies, right? You had a red one and a blue one, and then you could actually see the 3D image because it was off-centered, and you could see the line, right? So I think that's interesting that they use this red and blue because we're not allowed to see the 3D because we're only seeing in 2 dimensions, right? I also think it's interesting that street gangs fall on the lines of blue and red. Oftentimes, street gangs are aligned with this blue and red. So I think there's a gambit being run on us, and I think we're missing opportunities to have a deeper conversation. And so this is the same map. So here we are. It is said that Minnesota is blue. It's a blue state. But when we look here, we see something a little bit different. And until we're able to see what the real story is, that we'll miss the whole thing. We'll miss the whole thing. Because the people who did the exit polls predicted that there was going to be a different outcome than what was the outcome. And so as I was thinking about that, and I was reading articles about it, and they were saying people were lying. And I was like, no, people weren't lying. People answered the question that you asked. So what was the problem? They were asking the wrong question because they did not know what this election was about. And I think this map, this Minnesota map, tells us what this election was about. It gives us clues on how we can be not only better human beings, but how we can actually understand the people that we're supposedly opposites to. Right? So what does this map suggest to you? This is county by county.
Differences between urban and rural areas.
Certainly differences between rural and urban areas. What's the implication of that? That we may be surrounded by people who are likely to think about us, think like us. What else? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So how money gets made. What else do we recognize around some of those kind of bluer areas? What else is there? It's a more diverse culture, which means we have the opportunity to practice more, right? What else? There's more population. Major universities. So we have these opportunities to practice more of dealing with, monitoring, interacting with diversity. Where in the blue areas, what do we recognize? That there aren't those same opportunities to practice. I mean, the red areas, I'm sorry, yes. Thank you for that, right? So in the red areas, we don't have those same opportunities. So what this map actually tells me is that in the blue areas, we have more opportunities to practice, and in the red areas, we have less opportunities to practice, which means we just need more practice. We need more practice. And all too often, we talk about conservative with the big C, and I would like to suggest that red represents conservative with a small c. And what does that mean? What does the small c mean? Well, when we think about the word conservative, what does it mean? What does the word mean? Not the political leanings, but the word conserve. Yes. Keep it for a rainy day. Keep what you have, right? Plan ahead, right? And I think that is what that red is recognizing. Simultaneously, liberal with a small L, what does it mean to be liberated? To be free. So here we have people who want to conserve what they have, keep things the way they are. We also have people who say, you know what? I want to be free of constraints. Don't constrain me. Don't bind me down. And so when we actually look at those things, that little L and that little C, we can actually see where people are coming from and say, look, we're not that far apart. right? And so part of my goal is to see this blue and red become shades of purple. I think Kelly was kind of hinting at that. What if you're not blue or red? What if it were shades of purple? And so as we think about that, if we don't understand the context that we're in, we can't develop the kinds of relationships that we need, that the world is asking for, right? And as leaders in this organization, we need to think about how do we build bridges by understanding where people are coming from and also what they're after. So what are people after? So we'll get to that. So there's that. So I'll get to the curative culture in just a second. So what I'd like for you to do is to take out the changes coming handout, and on that front page you'll see 5 circles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I want you to put one thing that you value in each one of those circles. One thing that you value in each one of those circles, or that is important to you. One thing that you value or that is important to you. All right, it looks like most people have 4, if not all 5. So what I like to do is play a game, and the game is very simple. What I want you to do is I want you to get 2 signatures for each one of your circles, and I want people to sign on your paper if they agree with what you have or they have something similar to what you have. All right, so they said, that's a really good idea, I think that's great, I'm going to sign on that thing. Or they have something similar to what you have and they sign on that. So if you have uncle and I have father, that's family, I can sign on that, all right? So 2 signatures for each one means you'll have a minimum of how many signatures? A minimum of 10. You have 90 seconds to do it starting now.
I don't know, maybe not similar. I don't know, that's a good question.
– 60 seconds. Oh, I didn't.
Look, no one's out. Come on, John, let's see what you got. Well, I, families like here,
Seriously.
4, 3, 2, 1, and game over. Game over.
where is it?
So cool. So as you were walking around, you're looking at other people's papers. Were there things that you saw in other people's papers, and you were like, "Man, why didn't I think of that? I should have wrote that down." What were some of those things? Faith. Peace. Nature. Anything else? Decisiveness. I like that. Cool. As you were also walking around the room, were there things that were more difficult to find people to sign on, or you actually didn't find? Yes. Okay. So some people were just matching. We're trying to match. All right. So is there one that you didn't get someone to sign on? Okay, please raise your hand if you value kindness and empathy, even if it wasn't written on your paper. All right, cool. One more that people either had a difficulty finding someone to sign on, or you didn't, or still blank.
Peace. I got one.
Peace. Right? Please raise your hand if you can appreciate peace, if you can value peace. All right, cool. And Jennifer. Civil freedom. Please raise your hand if you value civil freedom. All right. So freedom in a civil society, right? Cool. So what do you think is the objective of this particular game or activity? Yes.
There's common threads that we can share with everybody.
Yeah.
And every culture has common threads. Because everyone's going to say things like family, spouses, children, some sort of economic security, safety, or other all common things that can find bonds that we don't. Therefore, we can break.
That's right. You can bridge on those human universalities, right? What I'd also like to suggest is that there are ways in which we are very much alike because we're human beings. Right? We all hunger, we thirst, we have aspirations, right? Simultaneously, what is also true, if we have all of these commonalities, what is also true? We also have deep differences as well. So where do those differences come from?
Level of this basic human, basic need of safety and stability that maybe inherently
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
How and where you were raised and your experiences.
Yeah.
I was going to say, resources are limited. Resources are not, they're limited. And so if someone else is gaining their freedom, their financial well-being, their leadership perception, maybe a reality of it comes at the cost of your financial well-being, your opportunity.
Yeah.
So there isn't a difference. It's they're acting upon the thing that they value negatively impacts your same value potential.
And I would say that both of those are perceptions, right? So this idea that resources are finite is a perception. Here's an example, right? So my wife makes great buttermilk biscuits. Love her buttermilk biscuits. She made some last night with barley stew. It was 102 outside, but she wanted barley stew. So whatever, she does her, right? But she made this buttermilk biscuits. And I remember a time when we ran out of buttermilk. We ran out of buttermilk. And so, does anyone know what you do when you run out of buttermilk? Or suggested things? So yeah, we could obviously go buy more, right? But it was very pressing and I didn't have time to go buy more. So my wife made it. So she took lemon juice and put it in whole milk and it curdled and voila, buttermilk. I would suggest that there is a perception that resources are finite and limited. And I would offer that the way we think about those things might impact their ability, that our worldview around the finiteness of things could be a trap for something else. Chad, I really appreciated what you just offered as well, because when we think about those differences, that it is in fact, differences come from the context, not from our human abilities, right? Not our nature as human beings, but the context in which we've grown up in. The fact that I have curly hair and a wide nose and darker pigment is less about me being a human, but more about where my people grew up being human, right? And so I think oftentimes we see our differences, and those differences can become obstacle illusions. Obstacle illusions, artificial barriers to authentic human relations, right? And so what are some of the barriers to that? And we'll talk about that right now. So what are some of the barriers to change, barriers to looking at cultures in a new and different light? So on the back side of that page, and we're going to come back to this values page a little bit later, but there's an allegory that I love to use, and it's Plato's allegory of the cave. How many people have read or have gone through Plato's allegory of the cave? All right, cool. Many of you know the story because it's a part of just really good storytelling. So if you've seen The Matrix, that was an allegory. If you've seen the Robin Williams film, What Dreams May Come, that is a version of this particular story. So do you think it will work best for you to read it on your own, or should we read it aloud and then kind of discuss it? Which works best for people? What's that? Okay, read it aloud. Oh, on your own. Okay. So I'll give you about 2-3 minutes to read it on your own, and then we'll come back and talk about it. All right. So what do you think about this story? If this was a real thing that was happening, what would you think about the people who were in the cave? You feel sorry for them, all right? So Sue, why would you feel sorry for them?
Because they can't see anything except what they're forced to see.
They can't see anything but what they're forced to see. Other people, what do you think about the folks in the cave? Sue said she feels sorry for them. How would other people feel about those folks? They're missing out on all the awesome things outside the cave. Right? There's lots of, the reason I like this allegory because there's lots of symbolism in here, right? So you can talk about the fire, the difference between the fire and the sun, right? The idea of a shadow, what is a shadow versus the real image, right? The idea of what it means to be enlightened, right? So what does that mean to be enlightened? So why do you think the people are resistant to change in this cave? Why are they resistant to change?
I think the images that we see and the sounds that we hear are magnified by the exact way the shadow casting on the wall. That this might be giant scary animal that unsafe over here. When the space is here, if they just turn around and look at it, could be funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think that safety is relative.
Safety is relative.
That you're able to deal with what you've got. That feels manageable.
Yeah.
And it's less unknown or causes less anxiety than what you don't know.
It's very interesting. So I'm from Dayton, Ohio. It's where I grew up. And I have relatives who believe that Trader Joe's is not for them. Like that's not a place where they belong, or they're not allowed to go to Trader Joe's. Anybody ever been to Trader Joe's? Yeah. You haven't? Okay. Try it, Chad. Try it.
You're not missing anything. I have had the $2 shop in there.
It's a grocery store, right? But it's a kind of hippie kind of grocery store if you're not used to that kind of thing, and it's not for them. There are actually people who don't leave their own neighborhoods because, again, safety is relative. Yeah, interesting. So what are these people willing to do to not have to expose themselves to these huge risks? Yeah, right? Have we seen that in human history? Where a person or a leader of movement says, we can be different, we don't have to be stuck the way we are, let's do something different. And the people say, you know what, before we change, I'd rather kill you than change. So,
The Civil War is a great example of that. We're not changing, we're going to fight you for that.
all right, so the Civil War is an example of that. What are some other examples? Yeah, so give me one of the many.
I mean, so my junior was assassinated, my others were assassinated.
Right? Medgar Evers said we can do something different than what we're currently doing. Let's do it. And rather than change, people got rid of him. One of the most powerful people, I think, in the civil rights movement or outside of the civil rights movement was Fred Hampton, who was a Black Panther. And he was, for a short time, the chairman of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. And this dude was so bad that they just went in and killed him. They didn't set up any kind of, they just went in and killed him. Because of the many things, he was getting the Latin gangs. He was getting the so-called black gangs and the poor white nationalists to get together and start having meetings about a common oppressor. And that certainly couldn't happen in a city like Chicago, right? And so I think those are examples of people so willing not to change that they will, in some cases, even act outside of their own best interest because they'd rather be where they are than to change. So then what becomes, for those of us who step out of the cave, with the recognition that there are all those people who choose not to, what then becomes our role? What should we expect as people who step outside of the cave? What should we expect to happen to us? So A, we will change, right? Because we're seeing different things. We're experiencing different things. And what comes along with that change? Opposition. Always opposition, right? So when you ask yourself, I'm doing these things, I'm doing the stuff, and it's different. I'm thinking differently than other people. Why am I experiencing all of this pushback? It is because you are doing those things, right? It's to be expected. And if you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. And so it's important for us to recognize that as people who are striving for change, even as you climb so-called the ladder in your job, you're going to meet opposition, particularly from those people who either haven't made the choice to or don't have the skills to get to where you are. There are many times when I had to supervise people that I was a peer with, right? And then they're like, well, why did you, or how did you? And I'm like, I have the skills, I worked on the thing, and we made it happen. And as opposed to them doing the same things, they oftentimes would complain or try to bring me down, but then I have to kind of elevate to another way, or think how to be more strategic in how I interact with those folks. One thing, at the bottom of 2, you'll see the word paradigm. And what is a paradigm? What is a paradigm? It's a framework in which we think and act. What is a paradigm?
It should be a framework in which we think and act where we're stuck and we don't move out of it.
Okay. So we can stay within a particular paradigm and be stuck. So that's interesting that you say stuck. So how could one know that one is stuck? So, or what does that mean to be stuck?
Well, one doesn't know when it's stuck until you learn something different, from a different perspective, something outside of it, and then you see, oh, that's what it is.
Okay.
I think self-awareness can identify and stuff. So I had a friend recently say that they felt stuff and they didn't know why, and they couldn't articulate what to do, but they felt a need to move and they wanted it.
So self-awareness. A shortcut that I'll give you, and this is for free, is where your current state is not allowing you to reach your goal. That's when you know you're stuck. Right? So I have a goal to get to downtown. My car's not operating. I'm stuck unless I start thinking about how do I take public transportation to get myself downtown, or can I call an Uber, or when I start thinking differently, then I can actually get unstuck. Right? So cool. So here's some ways of overcoming resistance to change, right? So first, education and communication. So not only giving people information, but also receiving information back. So having a back and forth way of interacting with folks. Make sure that we're engaging people in a participatory activity where they can feel involved. And we'll talk about this feeling of involvement in just a second. That we also facilitate and support, and the word facilitate means to make the work easy, right? So facile in Spanish is easy. So facilitating, making things as easy for folks as we possibly can, and supporting them in that. that we negotiate and that we come to agreement. And I think that really hits number 4 is related to number 2. We also can manipulate and cooperate. So we can manipulate things. But what do you know about the manipulation that oftentimes can happen? What's the pushback on when people realize they've been manipulated?
They weren't willing to participate.
That they recognize they weren't a willing participant, and what? That you destroy trust and give rise to resentment, right? So people resent that. If you know that they're always late and you set the time earlier so they can be on time and they figure that out, how do they feel about that? Yeah, they don't like it, right? And then talk about this idea of explicit and implicit coercion. So the last 2 are probably the most negative ways to overcome resistance of change because they have some pretty detrimental pushbacks. So this idea of explicit and implicit coercion, yes.
I'm thinking about, I think on almost everyone's sheet, family or some sort of version of that was one of the values. And to me, and I think this was in the elevator page as well, is what is familiar is really important to us as humans. Being around people who are like us is important. And, the whole thing with family is you know them because of their relationship to you. And the difficulty, I think, taking people from the cave, for example, is if you go from the cave to the bright sunlight, it is such a stark contrast that it brings in all this risk.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I think that the question is how do you, one, move in a way that minimizes the risk or does it in a slow fashion maybe. And the second is how do you find the way to present the advantages of the unfamiliar. And Chad and I were both talking at the beginning about we spent time in Japan in 2 different ways. And he was in the military in Okinawa, and people there had a perception of what it meant to have a military base in Okinawa, and they had, there was multiple Sudan going on with the Japanese on the island, because it was in the military. So I was in the town where we were the only white family in town, and it was looked at as the foreigners, all the kids would be at us, and the foreigners. And then you can look at that as an opportunity, or you can look at that as why it's very, kind of come back within the familiar. And so for me, I'm just kind of thinking through how do you present it in a way that there's new flavors in your food, and this is a good thing for you and not a bad thing for you. These things that I'm familiar.
Yeah, and I would say I go back to what I just said earlier around this idea of goals, right? So, and Sue said stuck, right? Just a little while ago. So there is a documentary that I'd encourage you to watch. It is called Welcome to Shelbyville. Has anyone seen that? All right. So in Shelbyville, Tennessee, President Obama was elected in what year? What was that? 2008. So in 2008, there was an influx of Somali immigrants in Shelbyville, Tennessee. And so this documentary kind of goes through their journey, right? And so one of the things that is really interesting, because again, going back to, I think goals are what really should drive our thinking about how to do all those things that you're talking about. Because there was a couple that was stuck, and they were having a yard sale in their front yard, and the guy's working on his truck. This is rural Tennessee. And the guy's complaining. He's saying, these immigrants are all coming and taking our jobs, and Tyson Foods has a processing plant down there, and so people were coming to do what immigrants oftentimes do, right? They take the jobs that are undesirable to the majority of the population, and they do them. And so he was complaining, and he was, they're coming and taking our jobs and all this kind of stuff. And again, he's stuck. And then his woman comes over, and I'm not sure if it's his wife or whatever, she's pregnant or whatever, managing the yard sale and that kind of stuff. And she said, we used to be prosperous in this community. We used to, have all sorts of jobs. We used to, people could make a good living here. And so the interviewer says, well, what kinds of jobs were here? She said, we used to be the pencil factory of the world. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know the last time I bought a pencil, right? Nonetheless, a pack of pencils. So those folks were stuck because they had the wrong goals in mind. Are pencils coming back to being produced in in rural Tennessee? Probably not. Right? And so when we talk about being stuck, are my goals and where I am aligned? And if I'm someplace and my goals are way back here, then I'm off purpose. I'm off purpose. And so, how do we help those? Let's find out what people's goals are, and then try to align their goals with the trajectory of their behaviors. Are your behaviors on purpose, or are they off purpose? Right. So, here are certainly some ways to overcome resistance to change. So let's do this. Let's take about a 5-minute break. 7 minutes. Let's do a 7-minute break, and then we'll come back and engage in our next level. All right? 10:07. Thank you. So were you guys studying in Japan?
My mom was a professor at St. Mark's, and she was a sabbatical. And so, sister, the other day, small town of 100,000. Small town of 100,000. But we were. The base of our kids like preschool and
I don't care. I just want to know.
It was tough at first.
Oh, yeah.
Being there, taking that and being the person who is so good at changes the whole way to see the world. I think
There are some students
Yeah. Well, that's good to know. But not this one. I told you so many things.
And we're looking at 75. And I know it's not, we're gonna be looking at.
That's so funny, I don't know how it's gonna affect you.
Because they're gonna see, we're also saying, hey, you know, we don't, because. And it doesn't matter to me if it's a health department. The hard part is it's long. And so it doesn't matter. They need to stop it, somebody else, something else. I mean, but they couldn't even take the bus, they couldn't take the bus, the bus we have to pay for it, because they couldn't hold the 25 cars to take the bus. So, one thing we're seeing now is our road crew will pay. Yeah, but I don't know, it's like, it's gonna be helpful in places like. I appreciate that.
I mentioned that we're gonna put that live in Canada, basically, the 10 for 3.5 years as well. Not an open house.
Yeah, I wasn't, I went with.
Yep.
Just what I told you about how it's.
Yeah, I was gonna be curious.
That's all I'm
The actual plan.
Yeah, we were just like. Filling out for.
Yep.
Saying you're on the.
I'm trying to think the actual suburb or town or it's called.
Yeah, we're starting to think on we get all the Peter Valley and the Martins and all. You know, what they're getting is a standalone, system that all of them, everything within the community. Yeah, because this is, it's not just me, it's probably something. The big thing is it's all season.
Well, so you opened it back up, but they still not part-time,
We got Garrett, so we got. And there's a lot of. Well, it's not so much us, we report to them. The other part of this is soon happening, so we gotta, we all have to work all the time. So we can all start taking a video of that, put it out there. It is because it's going outside.
All right, so it looks like everybody's here. So I have a question, and this actually is it's related, but not related. So my wife is absolutely enamored with how she can call someone on the phone when she's catching the bus, and they know exactly where she is, tells her how to turn, left or right, given the street. Does anyone know how you train folks to give that level of detail on helping people use the transit system? Anybody here partially responsible for that training? Okay, so I just want to say, kudos. My wife loves it because she's like, I'm lost, and she'll call and they'll say, turn left. Are you at this corner? Yes. All right, turn right. Okay, do you see the thing? Yes. Okay, now go to this and walk down. I mean, absolutely. It's like the person is standing next to her. It's a little bit creepy, but she really appreciated it. So just want to put that out there. You guys are doing a wonderful job on that customer service end of things. So I do want to pick up the pace a little bit and get you into some more fun stuff, as well as give you some notes that you can write down as a part of your collection of information and knowledge. So right at the bottom of under that allegory of the cave, you see the word paradigm. And a paradigm simply is the way you see the world. And I would suggest that we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. And some of the lenses that we use are things like gender or race or our geography or our governmental structure. Those things allow us to see the world. We see the world through those lenses, but not as it is, but as we are. So if we want to see the world differently, what must be changed? Us. We have to be transformed, right? If we want to see things differently. So, and I don't know about you, but just thinking about as I get older and I'm having a different relationship with my parents, my childhood makes much more sense now, given my new relationship with my parents, right? So being a parent and having conversations with another parent who happens to be my parent, I understand a lot more both about myself and my upbringing. And it's actually changed some of my stories growing up, right? There's one story that my siblings and I love to talk, and we thought our mother was nouveau, avant-garde. She was thinking outside of the box when we had breakfast for dinner. We were just so thrilled with that. We're like, this is the best thing ever. And then in talking with my mother, she's laughing because she said, baby, that was all we had was breakfast to serve for dinner, right? I didn't know that. And so now I'm like, oh, wow. My parents did a lot of incredible things for us. So we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. And if we want to see the world differently, then we have to change us. And then what we'll be able to see will also change, right? So there's that. I just want to touch, and I'm sure you've been exposed to these concepts, but I just want to give you my take on them so you have something to balance off of, right? So you've had other people talk about it. I just want to talk about it in my way, and then you can decide for yourself how you want to use these things. So first of all, so the four terms are diversity, equity, equality, and inclusion. And what I would say is that all of these things are in concert with one another, and and I would not use them exclusively by themselves because I don't know that they necessarily work that well by themselves, right? So diversity that's fine. So if you can write down a different definition of the word diversity, which is the recognition and honoring of our commonalities and our differences. The diversity is the recognition and the honoring of our commonalities and our differences. Oftentimes, particularly in trainings like this, we talk about one aspect or the other, but never both simultaneously. So diversity is the acknowledgement, the accounting, the honoring of our commonalities and our differences. And so Equality is making sure that everyone has the same access, the same resources. I tried to demonstrate that with the picture of, everyone having the same box, right? But folks are at a different height. So even if they had the same box, they're not able to get the same outcome given that. And then equity is making sure people get what they need so that they can have a similar outcome. So equality is making sure that everyone has the same thing, and that is fairness. So equality is about fairness. Now, there's something interesting about that concept, because what have your parents told you about life? Life is not fair. So I think it's interesting that we're oftentimes looking for fairness when we already know that life is not fair. However, we should be looking for equity, right? We should be looking for equity, giving people what they need. I know that it was not fair that my sister got things that I didn't get. But I was a boy and she was a girl, and she needed different things than I needed. The activities she participated in were different than the activities that I participated in, right? So it was unfair. So equity is unfair. It is unfair, where equality is about fairness. And then lastly is this idea of inclusion. And I think people have confused or convoluted this idea of inclusion with thinking that inclusion means we need to do something extra. And what I would suggest is that inclusion means that we need to take down artificial barriers. So that if we take down the barriers, then we don't need this idea of equality, or we don't need this, to separate equality or separate equity if we lower barriers that prevent people from having access to what they need, right? And we'll talk about what people need in just a second. So those are some things that are important. I did want to tease out a couple of things. So you'll see pictures like this: equality, equity, and liberation. And I think I have a bigger picture. So what do you notice about this person shopping? What is happening around them? Yeah, so it's a dying protest. And what is this other person doing? They're carrying on with their everyday lives, right? And what's that? They're hungry. They're blah, blah, blah. And I think this is an interesting thing to recognize about human motivation, right? So even though we see all these things going on, if we're not conscious, we can still go on about our lives with all this stuff happening around us and not even miss a beat or pay attention to it. So I have a political agenda. I have a political agenda. I'll just put that out there. And I am on the side of the Constitution of the United States of America. I am not an anarchist. I believe in the Constitution. I think it's a wonderful document. I think that people don't spend enough time understanding the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights that fall under it, right? And so the preamble to the Constitution. That's my daughter, by the way. I just had to, I thought that was a cute picture, and I just wanted to see her today. So the preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare and securing of blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't know about you, but when I read those words, I get a warm fuzzy right in my heart. Anybody else get a warm fuzzy? Right? These are great, wonderful words. They paint a wonderful picture of America. They paint a wonderful picture of the United States of America. Love it. Good stuff. What else? In that picture that was painted, who was missing from that picture? Who was missing from the picture? Yes.
All the indentured servants, slaves, others who were not property owners particularly.
So not property owners, so that would have been who? So women would not have been property owners. Obviously slaves that would not have been property owners. Indentured servants who, and what did those indentured servants look like?
They could be anybody that were under servitude for 7 years or longer, as basically their property to somebody.
Yep, so they're property to somebody else, but what did the majority of them look like? So many of them were Irish. They were immigrants. They were the newest people that came to the United States. So when they talk about this idea of who can participate in this government, it was who? White male landowners, right? And fairly, so-called fairly rich. Was that the majority of people who immigrated to this country? No, it was not the majority. It was a minority of people, right? And so when we talk about who's missing from this picture, that's a group that was missing. Women are missing from this particular picture. Who else is missing from this picture? Native Americans are missing from this picture, right? So those are the people who are missing. Now, this is the funny thing about that. So I have friends who say, well, why do you even pay attention to the Constitution? It wasn't written for you. It wasn't written for people like you. And I smile at them and I say, well, they should have never taught me to read. Because now that I know that I can read it, it now applies to me. So I'm going to apply it to me, right? And so we talked about who is missing. So one thing I'd like for you to help clear up for me, and you may want to write this down someplace, is this idea of social justice. Because people think that this is some kind of leftist, snowflake, soft kind of, anti-whatever thing, this idea of social justice. But social justice is rooted in the Constitution. It's rooted in making sure that people have access to everything that the law says they should. Both the United States Bill of Rights, as well as the UN Declaration of Human Rights, right? So we are a nation of laws, and we abide by those laws. And social justice is making sure that people have all the rights that are guaranteed them. And we also recognize that one of the things that separates us from many other countries is that when we have unjust laws, what do? We change them. When we change unjust laws, right? One of the ways we do that is partially by resistance, but ultimately we get into the system and we make an argument to change those unjust laws, right? You can see that with all sorts of amendments, both at a state level as well as a federal level. So social justice is about making sure that everyone is in the picture, right? Cool. So when we talk about this idea of cultural competence, I want us to think about cultural competence in this way, that it's about talking about people, it's about talking about our processes, and it's talking about power or participation. So people, process, and power. Cultural competence is recognizing that we're talking about people, processes, and power because they all come out of a context, and that culture is a reflection of the context, right? So culture is a reflection of the context. We'll talk more about some of the underpinnings of cultural competence in just a second. So what is the most... So my grandmother was my person. I love my grandmother dearly. She her birthday was October 14th. I was born October 30th. I loved her. She was my person. And when she died, I took it personally, right? Universe, why? And the universe said, nobody gets out of this alive, right? So I took it personally. And so when we have some interesting customs in my family. So when my grandmother died, they put her in a dress that she wouldn't normally wear. She had on makeup and she never wore makeup. And they put her wig on wrong, right? So she's laying in this box on display. So people are walking around and they're looking at my grandmother, and you have some people who are talking to my grandmother. There were individuals who were slipped my grandmother notes. And then there's that one family member who wants to touch the dead body, right? And I was there. I was like, grandmother didn't want you touching her alive. You're certainly not going to touch her now when she can't defend herself, right? So you have all that kind of stuff going on. And what was happening? How did my grandmother respond to all this communication? She didn't. Why? Because she couldn't, right? So that was my grandmother's body, but that wasn't my grandmother. So afterwards, we would go to her house and have spaghetti dinner and talk. It's called the repast dinner, right? And so we're doing all this stuff and we're laughing and joking, and people are telling stories about my grandmother and also all this kind of stuff. And it feels like my grandmother is there, right? But she can't animate anything. I can't hug her. I can't hear her stories anymore. Right? So her spirit feels like it's there, but it can't animate anything. And so when I think about the human soul, what I recognize is that there's a relationship between the body and the spirit. And when there's a tight bond, we have the human soul. We have the human soul. And that the body without the spirit is a thing. The body without the spirit is a thing. And that the spirit without the body is powerless. It can't animate anything, right? So my grandmother, is wherever she is, but she can't interact with me in the same way she could when she was connected with her body, right? And when we have the split between the body and the spirit, we have something that we refer to as dis-ease. Dis-ease, a disconnection. One of the first things that, that when someone has a serious illness, outside of the physical treatment, they also start doing mental or emotional or spiritual treatment to get them to start thinking better so that their body can respond to the medicine, right? Oftentimes referred to as mindfulness or gratitude thinking, which helps that medicine to work more effectively, right? Trying to bring that spirit and that body back together. Well, we also recognize that there are things out there that are trying to drive a wedge between the body and the spirit. There are things that are trying to drive the body, a wedge between the body and the spirit. Because if they can make the spirit go away, then the body becomes a thing, right? So here's a story, and I don't... So I'll just tell the story. So, did anyone see Roots, the Alex Haley miniseries? Right. So for those of you who may not have had the opportunity to see it, Alex Haley wrote a book about his family's journey from West Africa to the United States, and there was a miniseries that dramatized the book. And early in the story, there's a story about a young man named Kunta Kinte, Alex Haley's one of his earliest relatives. And he's played by LeVar Burton, the Reading Rainbow guy, right? So LeVar Burton plays Kunta Kinte. Kunta Kinte is captured and brought to the United States, and they're going to condition him for the economic system of slavery. So they tie him up in the stirrups, and the conditioner hits him with this, this whip-like thing on his back, and he says, "What is your name?" And he says proudly, my name is Kunta Kinte. And the guy says, no, your name is Toby. And so he hits him. Ah! And so this continues and continues and continues until both men are tired and worn out. And so finally, the guy hits him this one last time and he says, what is your name? And he says, my name is Toby. What happened for Kunta Kinte? He had to find a way to adapt to that situation. And so the conditioner was trying to transform him from a human being into a slave, trying to make him a cog in his machine. And so oftentimes there are things that try to drive a wedge, that try to break our spirits from our soul. One thing I'll just name it, that happens to us is that we mature. Maturity. Do you remember when you were a child? Anybody dance as a child? Right? Or sing? My daughter is 4 years old and she sings this goofiest song, or she changes the lyrics to songs. She dances. She does all sorts of stuff. And I get great joy in that, because if I did that, people would question my sanity. Right? But she's just having a great old time. But I have calluses on my life because now I'm mature. That's not what mature people do, right? Another void and so when that drive, when that crack happens in that human soul, there's a void that's formed, and there's a monster that's waiting for the void. There's a monster that is seeking out that void. Actually, the monster helps create the void, and that monster is free market capitalism. Free market capitalism. How many people have ever seen a commercial that made you feel good about yourself because you watched that commercial? I mean, outside of the herpes commercials, because they're living life. What are most commercials saying to you? You're not doing it right. You need this product. It will make you happy. And even some of the shows that come on before the commercials create such a stir of anxiety. They're coming for your stuff. Watch out, because they're going to come take your stuff, and they want what you got. Watch out. And then they go, and now for a commercial break. Are you suffering from anxiety? Do you need da-da-da-da-da-da? Take this medicine. You'll only lose sight in your left eye, and your liver will only stop working after, whatever, right? So all these side effects. So when we think about this, the human soul, and we think about the fact that, what do we know about free market capitalism actually filling that void? What do we know about that? Does it work? No, it doesn't work. Why? Because it evaporates, right? So we've had avatars that have taught us about this, right? Janis Joplin, Elvis Presley, Robin Williams, right? Philip Seymour Hoffman, Prince. These are all people who had wealth. They had everything you're supposed to have to make you happy. But it doesn't work. Right? It doesn't work. And so what does work? Bringing the spirit and body back together. Right? Bringing the spirit and body back together. So what are people after? What brings that body and spirit back together? Well, there are four truths about human beings. One is that human beings can learn, change, and grow. So who I am today is not who I was at 17. Thank God, right? I'm growing. And people do what they think works, even when what? People do what they think works, even when what? Even when it doesn't work. But why do they do things that don't work, that aren't effective? Why are they doing these things that aren't effective? So one is conditioning. Why else? It's the only way they know. They think they'll get a different result. And it's been effective in the past. Right? It's been effective in the past. So me stomping off when we're having a heated discussion of something, somehow it worked for me in the past. So I'm going to keep doing it until I realize that it no longer works for me. Right? Tantrums. Right? So I don't throw tantrums like I used to anymore. They look different now. Right? But I don't do those things because now I realize that they don't get me what I want, right? So people do what they think works even when it doesn't because it's been successful in the past. And then all human behavior is goal directed. And that's something I want you really to hold on to. That all human behavior is goal directed, which means that people do something because they are trying to get something, whether they're able to articulate it or not. So when we talk about that 11-year-old, right? He's after something. Even if he can't articulate it or she can't articulate it, they're after something. But I'm going to give you a shortcut to know what they're after, even if they can't identify what they're after. So those immigrants that keep coming to this country, they're after something. And I'm going to tell you how to shortcut that. Refugees who come here are after something. People who move here from Chicago are after something by coming here. So all human behavior is goal directed. And if we can understand the goal, then we can understand their behaviors, right? And then lastly, attitude is a reaction to goals. So oftentimes we get caught up in the flamboyance of attitudes, right? The behavior demonstrated by attitudes. When in fact, that emotional acting out is a smoke screen. It is a side effect, right? It's a side effect. So I want you to think about a time when you went to an adult and you asked for permission to do a thing. And it was something that you really wanted to do. And when they said no, what was your attitude? What was your response? You told all your friends you're going to do this, or you're going to get this. You build up in your mind, this is going to happen. And then you ask an adult and they say no. What happens to the attitude? It goes down, becomes poor, right? But in other situations, you've built this story up and you go to the adult and you say, adult, can I buy? Can I go? Can I do? And they say yes. And what is your attitude like then? Positive, good, great, right? So what is it that actually determines an attitude? And I would suggest to you that it is the goal. So when you see a person with a bad attitude, one thing you can recognize is that they are not getting something that they want. So then as someone who wants to be effective, and if I want to help them change their attitude, then what do I have the opportunity to do? Or what's my responsibility to them given my position if I want to help them change their attitude? So first, understand their goal. Secondly, what? I can help them achieve their goal, or I can help them change their goal, right? So as a leader, when I have someone with this attitude, I have to understand what their goal is and either help them achieve their goal or help them change their goal. Now, I could tell them that they have a new goal. This is your goal. What am I going to be met with? Resistance. And resistance is futile. It's the Borg. Any Star Trek people? Right? So ultimately, what are the goals of human beings? And I would suggest that there are simply three. that people are looking for significance, they're looking for belonging, and they're looking for safety. So when we talk about this idea of cultural competence, I have to recognize that this is the universality of human beings. Significance, belonging, and safety. That everyone wants to feel value. They want to recognize that they have power to do something. Significance. I was not born on accident, and I can be a contributing factor in my own life or in the lives of other people. And whether God tells me that himself, or I decide that this is going to be my vocation or my skill or what I can give, right? Significance. Belonging suggests that people want to be in relationships with people who understand their significance. So you are in relationships with people who understand your significance. So I like to be in a workplace that understands my significance, that I'm properly placed in the organization to give of my significance. I would be a horrible person in a computer room where I'm just entering data, because that's not my significance. That's not what I can offer. That's not the best of what I can give. Right? I can probably adapt to doing that, but I would drive all the other people in the space, to their wits' end, because I'd be asking questions and trying to talk to people and playing music, and because that's the gift of my significance, right? And I would venture to say, in your personal lives, I bet your friends recognize your significance oftentimes more so than your family members do. The groups that you choose to belong to, or the people you choose to have in your life, oftentimes recognize your significance more so oftentimes than your family, right? And then lastly, we want to be safe. We want to be physically safe. We want to be emotionally safe. We want to be intellectually safe. We want to be spiritually safe, to be in relationships with people who understand our significance, right? So we're oftentimes looking for, all human beings are looking for safety, significance, and belonging. Why do kids join gangs? One of those three reasons, right? One of those three reasons. Why do we go to work every day? I'd imagine it's one of those three reasons, right? So when we talk about this idea of cultural competence, we just talked about the universality, and I said, in terms of diversity, we are very much alike. And that's the universality of our human experience. But simultaneously, we're also very different. And so where does cultural competence come in? Cultural competence is recognizing that we all want safety, significance, and belonging. However, given our context, we may want it differently. We may want it differently. So what it means to seek significance in a great example. My wife is a Assiniboine from Montana, right? So on the res, as she affectionately calls her birthplace and her growing up place, on the res, significance, belonging, and safety looks very different than it does in Coon Rapids. So in Coon Rapids, having a nice fence and a very well manicured lawn is a way that you get significance in your HOA. But on the res, having a pony herd, whoever has the biggest pony herd, unmanicured lawns, driveway looking however you want, but safety, significance, and value safety, significance, and belonging comes from having the best pony herd, right? So want the same things, but context drives us to try to get them differently. So to understand that is cultural competence. And you'll also hear Abraham Maslow kind of talk about this in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a hierarchy of pyramid. Are people familiar with that? Okay, so those are some of the motivations of human beings. We've talked about our power and privilege, and I would suggest that your power and privilege feeds into and feeds out of safety, significance, and belonging, right? That it feeds into and feeds out of safety, significance, and belonging. So why is context important? Context is everything. So I want to turn to I didn't put it in that one. So we'll just go right here. So many of you have been exposed to the curative culture, and if you could, in your notes, if you could just go right under the roots of human motivation and just write down this or draw this curative culture. I think you'll find it useful later. So I like using this as opposed to the iceberg theory of culture. Have you seen that iceberg theory of culture? And how does that work? How does the iceberg theory of culture work?
Most visible versus what's invisible, a little bit up here and then flat.
Yeah, so usually it's either 10% or 20% above the water, and then the 80 or 90% below the water. I found that to have served its purpose. It was a great way to think about that. But I also think that human beings are a bit more organic than an iceberg, right? So I like this theory of the curative culture. And so in the curative culture, there are two parts to the carrot. There's the part above the ground, and what do we call that green part? What would we call it? The stem? Okay, so we'll call it the stem, right? We'll call it the stem. And then underneath the ground is the root, right? Now, those two things have a symbiotic relationship, meaning that they need each other to exist. And so what does the stem or the green part of the carrot do for the root? So it gathers the nutrients from where? From the sun, right? Photosynthesis happens and it gets stored down into the root. And what does the root do for the greens? It gathers the water and minerals from the ground and gives it to the green part, right? So they are symbiotic in relationship. They need each other. So in looking at this in terms of looking at culture, we'll call the green part the part that you can see about a culture, and we'll call the other part the root of culture, right? What we can also, that is also expressed in this idea that the part that you can see, we call those things artifacts. Right? So when archaeologists dig up old cultures, they're looking for artifacts. And what kinds of artifacts do archaeologists find when they find an old culture? They find pottery. What else? They find homes, buildings, sometimes remains of people. They find structures. They find dishes, combs, paintings, or other kinds of artwork, right? So they find these artifacts. And so when you think about your own culture, think about a culture you belong to. What are the artifacts of that culture? So what cultures do people belong to? Either by birth or by nationality or by choice. What are some cultures you belong to? What are some cultures you belong to? So okay, let's stick with the family culture, right? So what is an artifact from your family culture? So people keep passing down the orange candy dish, right? The orange candy dish. I'm going to come back and dwell on that a little bit more. Other people, what are some cultures you belong to, and what are the artifacts of that culture? Yes?
I know from my mom's side of the family, predominantly Irish Catholic, we got the church, we got the cemetery, everybody that they all leave it all there, I can go find most of my relatives, which I was at in one spot.
In one spot, right? So you have the church, which is an artifact. You have a cemetery that's an artifact, right? Is your lanyard an artifact? Yeah. What does your lanyard say? I mean, what does it represent? You belong to the culture of the Met Council. It gives you rights and privileges that other people who don't have that lanyard don't get, right? And some of us have varying access, even in the Met Council, of how our lanyards can get us into places, right? So it's an artifact. So there are tons of artifacts, right? Kelly, why do they keep passing the orange bowl? So is it an honor or a shame to get the orange bowl? Okay. To look at the orange bowl and not understand that other part, I would misuse the orange bowl, right? So attached to the artifacts are the values of culture. So the root of culture is actually its value. So the orange part of that carrot is the most valuable part that we like to use. And what do we know about that part of the carrot? Where is it? It's hidden from view. It's hard to get to. It takes effort to get to the values of a culture. So when I see the artifacts of a culture, what must I recognize about those artifacts? That they're directly connected to what? Values. They're directly connected to values. So that orange bowl isn't just the orange bowl, but it's attached to some values that manifest their physical representation is the orange bowl, right? So when you see a person with a hijab, you see a woman with a hijab, right? The head covering that many Middle Eastern or Muslim women wear, not limited to that religious group, but you see the hijab. What is that a statement of? It's a statement of values, right? It's a statement of values. When you see kids or people with their pants sagging, what is that a statement of? Values. She said that you're available in prison. I don't want to know how or why you know that, but, right? But it's a statement of values, right? So that statement of value, those artifacts that we see, it's a statement of values, and what ultimately is the deepest root of culture? Why do people do what they do? Because they're looking for? That's right. Right? So if I recognize that there's some, do I agree with someone wearing a hijab, or do I agree with someone having their pants sagging, or do I agree with someone wearing a lanyard for their work? My agreement with that is irrelevant to the fact that provides them what? Safety, significance, and belonging. It's irrelevant how I feel about what they do, but it provides them with safety, significance, and belonging. So when I go to a restaurant that's outside of, when I go to a Mexican restaurant or Asian restaurant or a Turkish restaurant, because there used to be one right down here in St. Paul. What was their name? It starts with a B. Babani's. It's gone, right?
No, it's down on that.
Oh, it's on the west side now. Okay, cool. So Babani's, right? So I go there. I see things that are different cultures, right? So what are some of the artifacts that I might see in many of these different restaurants? with see art and color, right? I'll see different kinds of foods. I'll see different kinds of ways of what art looks like and different kinds of people and all sorts of stuff, right? At the root of that is the values, right? The values. So why? So context is everything. So we have those things. Now, so artifacts are connected to values, right? Now, what happens when artifacts get disconnected from values? We end up with stereotypes. So a stereotype is an artifact that I don't understand what the value is, or that it's being used without the connection of the values, right? So Kelly, given the orange bowl, if I were given the orange bowl and I wore it as a hat, and I came around your family and they said, they see me with the orange bowl on my head as a hat, what would they, whether they wanted it or not, what would they say about my hat? That it was a bowl. And what would they think about me using that bowl as a hat? That I'm misusing the bowl. Why? Why would they say that I'm misusing the bowl? You know, I can do what I want, right? I mean, it's just a bowl. It's not how they use it, right? And it's not, I don't understand the meaning, because if I understood the meaning, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't use that bowl like that, right? And so when we have stereotypes are those things that we see, but we don't understand why people do that, right? So I want you to think about, are there some stereotypes that you have about groups of people, right? So these people are drunks. These people can dance. These people can't jump, right? Are there stereotypes that you have? And I want you to think about, do you know why those stereotypes exist? Because I've seen some of those things and I said, well, isn't that kind of true about them? Don't they kind of do that? Isn't that, whether I admit it to other people or not, I've said it within myself, well, isn't that kind of true? Or in my experience, I've seen blah, blah, blah. But know that, my experience is not all encompassing. I'm not what is it when you, omniscient. I'm not omniscient, right? So I don't know everything. I only know from my small part of the world. So when we talk about stereotypes, we're talking about those things that we can see, but we don't necessarily know. And we can misuse those. And that's where cultural misappropriation comes in. Is anyone familiar with that term? Misappropriation, right? So it's misusing. Some people will say that cultural appropriation is wrong, but I think people appropriate things all the time when they find it useful to them. Right? So I don't believe that appropriation is wrong. I think misappropriation is wrong. I told you my birthday is October 30th, and when I was a kid, I loved Halloween. Loved it, because you get the 3 C's: costumes, candy, and cake. Like, what more could a kid want, right? But as an adult, I dread Halloween. And why is that? Yeah, costumes, candy, and cake, right? Yeah, no, people take the opportunity to operate out of their stereotypes and without regard to what those things mean. And the other thing is, when we don't have our artifacts, when our artifacts aren't connected to our values, then we have a lost culture, right? We don't know what our culture is. And I would suggest that, and it's interesting, so doing my own research in my own classrooms, I would ask my Hmong kids about their culture, and they could tell me stuff, right? I'd ask my Native kids about their culture. They could tell me stuff. I'd ask my African kids, both Liberian and Somali kids, about stuff, and they could tell me stuff. My African American kids could tell me stuff. My Hispanic kids could tell me stuff. And then I ask my white kids about their culture, and they say, I'm American. And I say, yeah, you're right, you are. And so are the rest of us. So tell me about that culture. Why? I don't know. I don't have anything, right? And I said, no, you do have some things. And then we dial back and work through their family system, right? Anyone ever have, so I'm not Scandinavian, but I do know that there is, around Christmas time, there's an iron that you dip in batter and then you fry this cookie. The rosettes. Anybody made rosettes or know someone, right? So is that a cumbersome process to do that? Yeah. Why don't you just go to Aldi and buy some rosettes around Christmas? It's like, we do, right? But for those family members who make the rosettes, why do they go through all of that? Tradition, to tie back to what? Our root, right? Our root. And so when we think about this idea of culture, that red X represents Ellis Island. That red X represents refugee camps. That red X represents the effects of the transatlantic slave trade. That red X represents immigration. Right? So we couldn't keep all of our artifacts. We couldn't bring it all back. And so in some ways, many of us have lost parts of our culture. And so if I have a carrot and the top has been cut off and I'm looking in the garden, am I going to have a difficult time finding my carrot? I certainly am. Right? Simultaneously, what we also know is that if we keep the carrot in the refrigerator long enough, what starts to happen to the top of that carrot? It starts to grow again, right? It starts to grow. So I don't know if it's happened to you and in your family, but in many immigration stories, the first generation was like, we're going to shun the old world, we're going to accept this new world. And then 4 or 5 generations later, the family members are like, whatever happened to those old ways? Can we go back to doing some of those old ways? What was great-great-great-grandma's recipe for da-da-da-da-da? Or can we start taking some of that old language back and using that? Why? Because they recognize that there's a need for that root of culture to have some artifacts, to tie them back to their roots. What we also recognize is that, I didn't put it in here. But if, instead of a carrot, if we use an oak tree, does it look exactly the same as the carrot metaphor? Not exactly. Are the functions very similar to the carrot metaphor? Yeah, the roots just are different, right? The artifacts are different. Why? Because they're in different contexts. If it was a cactus, does a cactus operate basically the same as that carrot? It does, but the context by which it is operating is very different, right? So context is everything. And culture is an adaptation to context. So if you can write that down somewhere, culture is an adaptation to context. So we talked about the red and blue states, right? So the environment in 1980 was predominantly a conservative with both a big C and a small c. But if we fast forward to the 90s, we would see a map that looked very different. And so did the culture was very different, right? So culture is an adaptation to context. And context is time, space, and geography. And what do we know about those 3 things? Are they constant? No, they're constantly changing. Okay? So the dinosaurs were here and now they're not. Why? The context changed, right? The context changed and they could not adapt to it, right? The context changed. And so as context changes, so does culture. So does culture. Keep forgetting which. Look at this screen, look at this other screen. So here is a diversity model, and you can look at this in greater detail on your own, but really talks about the skills necessary to adapt as context changes occur, right? So there's that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this education, retention, and advancement, particularly as it relates to how we create a different kind of organizational culture so that we can be effective with our new employees and those folks who are existing, right? So first is this idea of power to the people, right? So what are the three things that people want? What are they after? Yep, that's right. So my thing is to always give people what they want. Give it to them. Power to the people. Take it. You can have it. You just might not get it the way you want it. So I talked earlier about power struggles, right? So I had a student named Jeff. And Jeff sat in the back of the class. And Jeff was distracting from my teaching, my lectures, my assignments that I was giving my students, right? So Jeff is back there. He's a cool kid. So not only do I have to contend with Jeff, I have to contend with all the other kids who follow Jeff, right? So I'm like, Jeff, put your chair down. I ain't putting my chair down. And guess what the other kids are saying? I'm not putting my chair down either. So now I got all this stuff. And so for a while, Jeff and I were wrestling over this stuff until I got a realization that I have all the power. I can make this a learning environment, or I can make this a confrontational environment. I have the power. So this is what I did with Jeff. So I said, Jeff, can you pass out these papers? Okay. So Jeff would come and pass out the papers. And then he'd go back to his seat. And then I'd say, the next day I'd be like, Jeff, I need you to collect the papers you passed out yesterday, and then can you take attendance? So day 2, Jeff is passing out the papers, collecting papers, he's taking attendance. Day 3, Jeff, can you pass out the papers, take attendance, and I want you to write these notes on the board. So I wrote these notes. Can you just write this on the board for me? So day 3, Jeff is collecting papers, passing out papers, taking attendance, writing notes on the board. And then day 4, I say, hey, Jeff, I'm going to need you to write down notes on the board, for the next couple of weeks because we're on this unit. Can you move your chair from back there and come sit up here so I can just pass you the notes? Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll do that, right? So what did I do? I gave him what he wanted, right? I gave him a purpose. I gave him safety, significance, and belonging. However, he thought he was going to get that, because what was he trying to get when he was in the back of the class? Safety, significance, and belonging, right? And so I just gave it to him, but just not how he wanted it, right? Not how he thought he was. Very sneaky, right? You got to be smarter than the machine, right? And so when we talk about how do we get people engaged, how do we invite people into our space, we have to recognize that we have to give them what they want. But given the structure, given the confines, given the context that we're in, there are certain ways that we can do that, right? So the other thing is understanding the motivations of human beings, and we're going to explore this idea of a life cycle of work versus employee engagement, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So when we talk about this idea of people, process, and power, when we talk about people, what is the diversity mix? So who is in your organization and who's missing from your organization? Who's in the picture and who's not in the picture? What does that diversity mix look like? And that not only is, not only is it just, racial or gender, but it's also aptitude and an attitude about work, right? So I think the teams I've been on that work best is where there's lots of diversity. Now, I will tell you that diversity adds time to task. It adds complexity to task. It's funny, I went to a holiday party at NPR, and I was very taken aback by the fact that they say they have diversity, but when I looked at those people, they all look the same. They all look like NPR people, no matter what their race was. They all, in Keen shoes and Birkenstocks and, wireframe glasses, no matter what their ethnicity or whatever, they were the same person, right? So when we talk about this diversity mix, we're also talking about who's missing from our team that could actually add things to the team. And many of you probably heard me tell this story again. When I worked at Anoka County, I was working with HR, and some resumes came across my desk. And what I knew was that we didn't have the kind of diversity mix that could actually make us competitive as a county, or at least deliver the maximum service that we could. And so there was a position open in Blaine at one of our licensing centers. And so I asked the hiring manager this question when I saw these two resumes. So one resume was from a woman who had been there for 2 years as a temp. She was going to a full FTE. And the other was from a woman from Ramsey County. Now, the woman that had been with us for 2 years, excellent work, did a wonderful job, and she got extra points for being a part of our system. The woman from Ramsey County did things differently, but a very similar job. The thing that made the difference between the two jobs was that the woman from Ramsey County was also a Hmong interpreter. So she did interpreting services as a part of her job. So I asked the hiring manager this question. I said, Lisa, which of these two candidates keeps us at the same quality of our work, and which of these candidates expands our capacity to serve? And I said, make your decision off that. And so looking at that and looking at one person having just, a little bit higher score versus this other person who had a different breadth of experience, she made her decision. And what do you think Lisa decided? She went with the Hmong woman, right? Because she could actually expand our capacity to serve, right? And so sometimes that's the thing we have to think about. And we talk about process. Is our process a heterogeneous process, or is it a homogeneous process? Meaning, is our processes designed for the majority of us, or is it designed for a mix of us, right? And that goes from job title, not titles, but job times that work can be done, the scope, the breadth, the width, really thinking about how can those things be done. And then lastly is this idea of power. When I talk about people, processes, and power, when I'm talking about power, I'm actually talking about participation. Who's able to participate in the decision-making around the things that people do? We know that when people are invested, when they have some, I guess they call it skin in the game, they oftentimes, so I will tell you this. I used to do free workshops, but I don't do free workshops anymore. Why do you think I don't do free workshops? Oh, by the way, I'm also a horrible capitalist. I want to put that out there. So I'm a horrible capitalist, but I don't do free workshops anymore. Why do you think that is? So yeah, there's that, right? So I have to make a living, I have to eat. Yeah, right? So what I found was when I was doing a lot of free workshops, people would sign up and not show up. Why? Because they didn't have any skin in the game, right? So now, everybody pays something, everybody doesn't pay the same thing, right? So if I have a Girl Scout troop or Boy Scout troop that wants me to come and do a training, I'm certainly going to go do it. But you at least got to pay me a sandwich, right? Everybody pays something. And so this idea of participation, how is it that people are able to participate in the organization? So, I'm going to skip that and we'll come back to that in just a second. You guys talked about Leone's 5 dysfunctions of a group in another session. This is simply a recap, but I also wanted to give you this, that at the bottom, so if we're talking about cultural competence, the first thing that we have to build is this idea of trust, right? And so how does trust get built? You can trust me. Is that how trust gets built? No. So how does trust get built? You have to demonstrate it. Make commitments over time, follow through, live to your word, not only inside but outside the organization. What would you think if you guys saw me at the at the grocery store and you saw me hanging out with my friends telling immigrant jokes? What would you think about this time that we're spending here? Well, that dude's a joke, right? No. So who you see me when you see me here, I'm the same person out there too, right? Which builds trust even when you don't see me. Right? And the other thing about an ally is somebody who has your back even when you don't see them. I don't have to see my allies to know that they have my back. Right? So trust. This idea of conflict. Conflict is natural, right? Because we oftentimes come from varying contexts that don't have the same resources or have different ways of viewing things that have shaped the paradigms that we have, how we see the world, have shaped all those things. And when I come in contact with another person, I run into conflict. It's natural. However, how do we get through conflict? How do we get through it? We have to work through it and not avoid it. Through compassion and communication, right? That's how we get through conflict. The rest of these, I'm sure you paid some attention to. Again, this is more stuff on that dysfunction of the team that you can look at on your own. You will have access to this. There's my dinosaur stuff. Context drives behaviors, right? Context drives behaviors. As context changes, so does culture, and so does my behavior, right? So the funny thing about the sagging pants thing. So I think Kelly talked about people in prison or whatever. As a teacher, I fought that in my classroom all the time. Pull your pants up, pull your pants up, pull your pants up, until I realized that was a statement of values, right? So to condemn their artifacts was to condemn their what? Their values. So if I told you that one of the value circles that you had was a dumb thing, or you shouldn't have it, or I'm going to take it from you, how are you going to respond to that? Yeah, hold it tighter. Forget you, dude. This is my thing, right? But one of the things I had to help my students with was recognizing that as context changed, so much their behavior. So although sagging pants may be a strategic advantage in your neighborhood, when we walk into a place of business, it's a disadvantage. So when I started teaching the nuance of that, I didn't have to teach so much the rule, but I could teach them how to operate in different contexts. And so when we have employees that may not be complying with the cultural norms, or it may just be a fact that they don't know the cultural norms, right? And so we have to explain, folks, this is how we do things here. And we may need to change and augment some of those things, but until that happens, this is what's going on. So we oftentimes have a meeting before the meeting, just so you know. Or we have a meeting after the meeting, just so you know. Anybody been a part of those meetings, right? Just so you know, so they can understand that. We have to understand that people are goal-driven, personality-driven, and competence-driven. Again, context is adaptation to change, right? So those are a bad example of Brazil nuts. But Brazil nuts at one time were also called by another name. Are people familiar with that? No? Okay. So there was a group that they're back in the day, they used to call Brazil nuts nigger toes. Right? Did the people that said it then, did they make that up? I would probably say most people didn't. It was what it was called at that time by some people. I don't think my people ever called it that, but that's a whole nother conversation. But we don't do that anymore. Why? Because the context has changed. Right? Or if we hear someone saying that, we say, hey, we don't say that anymore, right? What do you recognize about these shapes? They're the same shapes. And they're also different, right? So when we go back to this idea of diversity, this is a good metaphor to kind of think about, that it is about the commonalities and the differences. The other thing, and I talked about this just briefly just a second ago, that oftentimes competition or conflict is about an illusion. It's about how we see the world, that things are binary when in fact they are not binary. There are more options open to us, particularly if we can think strategically about them. And then this is more stuff about change management I wanted to kind of toss in. And I wanted to talk about cultural intelligence quotient, right? So IQ. And what is IQ? Or how would you define IQ or talk about IQ? What is that? It measures someone's level of intelligence. All right. One of the things I think is interesting is when people talk about IQ, they never ask the question, IQ for what? IQ for what? Right. So I know how to catch the bus. I know how to call an Uber. I know lots about apps and computers and all sorts of stuff. I was just in Montana, and I didn't know anything about how to put a saddle on a horse. Right? I didn't know the difference between a gopher and a prairie dog. Right? Didn't know. I don't know the difference between the types of cattle that were out on the pasture. I thought that a coyote was a German shepherd. I was far away. I was looking at it. I was like, that's a German shepherd. They're like, no, it's a coyote, right? Am I unintelligent in that context? Yes. Am I an unintelligent person? No. Right? So a lot of times, again, context is everything. And so what is intelligence in North America is not necessarily the same that's required in South America. What's in, Central Africa or Europe or whatever. So the real question is intelligence for what? And so when we talk about cultures, there are high context cultures and low context cultures. Are people familiar with that concept? So a high context culture is one where context is extremely important. Context is important. So people like to tell stories. People like to do long explanations. The group's effort is important. People use imagery when they tell stories or they make an explanation. Low context cultures are those cultures where the words are exact. They mean exactly what they mean. They're more legalistic. They're less relational. They spend a lot of time on preciseness. And so when we look at this top picture of the fish, in a high context culture where the group is important, what is happening with that top fish? So the group is important, the context is important, the background is important. What is happening with that red fish? In a high context culture. Yeah, he's being chased out of the group, right? Because he's different than the group. So in a low context culture, if we look at that bottom that bottom picture of that red fish, what is happening there? He's being followed, right? So the activities can look very much the same, but have very different outcomes depending on the context of that culture, right? So we would call the fish on the bottom the leader, right? He's leading the way, and these other fish are following him because it's a very individualistic culture, where high context cultures are very collectivist cultures. So why would I need to know that as a manager when dealing with either individual or a group? Well, if I understand what kind of culture they're coming out of, then I understand what is motivating them to do some of the things, or approaches that I can use to encourage them, bless you, to encourage them into a certain set of behaviors, right? You can also look at this on your own as cultural models on that spectrum of context of low and high context cultures. High context cultures are dynamic and animated. Nonverbals are critical. Time is irrelevant. It is, and then low context cultures, words are more important. They're controlled. They're email minded. They're factual. They're task oriented. In those low context cultures, very much about the individual's rights and whatnot. I'm going backwards. So so when we talk about this idea of context and culture, when we look at East Africa versus West Africa, are there some things geographically that would make those cultures different? That might suggest that those cultures have some complexity that may differ from each other. Just looking at the geography. So so tell me about the geography of what you know already. Where is West Africa? It's west. What borders West Africa? The Atlantic Ocean, right? What borders West Africa? East Africa. The Indian Ocean, and what else? The Middle East, right? The Middle East. So just looking at that, we can already see that there are going to be some differences between those two things. What do we know about the Middle East in terms of its temperature, in terms of its, what's that? The moisture? What do we know about the Middle East? Dry and arid, right? What do we know about being on the ocean? Much more temperate, right? Much more green. And so that has a role to play in how people have developed in that area and how they operate and see the world. The development of Israel was an important part in understanding how our world is developed today. So after World War II, it became very important because the Middle East itself had new lines drawn, new countries formed, new relationships established, right? And so that having an impact on the Middle East impacts how the rest of the world kind of has decided to interact with each other. Also recognizing, the relationship between the Middle East and North Africa, East Africa, and West Africa is extremely important. Understanding some of our history points. So again, you'll have an opportunity to look at this on your own, but understanding what the Marshall Plan was, right? So the Marshall Plan basically was the United States suggesting that if we can get these countries on our side, they won't be communist. And this is really the formation of what we typically refer to as the East versus the West, right? So this Marshall Plan. And then understanding the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And why is that important to us here in Minnesota? because it bleeds into people's fears about Somalis. That because of this conflict between Israel and Palestine being Muslim, people believe, whether it's true or not, that Islamic faith peace bleeds into the Somali community, which manifests itself here in the state of Minnesota, right? And I think we see much more problems or fears in places like St. Cloud than we do here in the Twin Cities. But that xenophobia is still prevalent. So when we talk about this idea of trying to become intercultural, what I like to have us think about is that this is on a continuum, right? And this continuum takes work, it takes time, and it takes attention. So when we're in a monocultural mindset, we're in denial. You know, we say that differences doesn't matter. I don't, yeah, we're all the same, right? And there are things that get missed when we have that kind of mindset, right? So the ability to maximize what people can do or think is missed. And then polarization is where we start judging differences. And we say, this is a good difference and this is a bad difference. This is a good sameness, this is a bad sameness, right? What we understand about human beings is that there are effective ways to do things and ineffective ways to do things based on the context. And so so there's that. So one thing, people ask me stuff like, do I think that, so some cultures believe in augmenting female bodies and male bodies in different ways. And people ask me, do I think that is right, wrong, or whatever? And what I always go back to is that context is extremely important. So in this context, in the United States, those aren't things that we condone as a part of this context. Maybe the UN can go in and say, in a greater context, this shouldn't happen in any place. But I will say that in this context, that we have a responsibility to live up to the standards of being that we've set in this context as being how we would treat human beings. Right? And then there's minimization, which de-emphasizes differences and says differences don't matter. People are people to me. Let's not talk about that anymore. And then acceptance is this idea that we at least know a lot about other people. This is where that cultural knowledge comes from. And I'm not sure if you've gone to, cultural knowledge trainings, like a Korean training or a Hmong training, and they give you the information about that. That's where we start to develop this idea of acceptance. And then lastly is this idea of adaptation. How do I use what I know to increase people's effectiveness for themselves as well as my own effectiveness? So how do I start to use that? And then here are some videos you can watch about individuals. So when we start talking about this idea of overall culture, I do want to bring us back to organizational culture. And it's shared values. It's something that we create together. It is not me saying this is what you do. This is you having an opportunity to practice what we do. So let's go over to, and all those things you'll see in your in the handout that the 3-hole punch handout. If you go over to the back side of, I thought I put page numbers in here, but I didn't. So if you go back to the back side of the mountain picture. Yeah, I thought they were all, 1 and 2. It says, healed people can heal. So first of all, so heal people can heal. One of the pitfalls that sometimes we'll have in organizations is that we have this dichotomy that gets painted of family versus team. Has anyone ever heard a manager or supervisor at any job that you've ever had say, you know, we're a family here? Has anyone ever heard someone say that or had it? Okay, cool. What do they mean by that? What do they mean by we're a family? That we support each other. We treat each other with respect. We have a common end goal. We care about each other. Oh. What's the goal of a family? Safety? Belonging? Who told you that? It was learned. This is one thing I'd encourage you to do, and this is just for your own household. Have a mission statement for your family. Tell them who they are and what they're supposed to do. Right? I know that I didn't have a mission statement growing up. All the stuff you're saying is just how I learned it too, right? It's just assumed. But the interesting thing is, if I choose not to do something at home as a part of my family, do I get kicked out? No, for the most part, not, right? And even if I am asked to leave, I'm still a part of the family. So if my nieces and nephews see me, they will say, he can't come over to our house, but that's still Uncle Andre, right? So I'm still a part of the family. Can we say the same for work? No, right? So all too often, when we do this family versus team thing, and I'm all down for allophilia, which is a positive regard for other people. But I also think that we get confused when we say that our workplace is our family. Because many of us have families that have alternative ways of functioning. Right? We all have that uncle or aunt or relative that is not in the mainstream of behavior. Right? Family relies a lot on emotions. It relies a lot on unbroken ties, which also means that it doesn't focus on goals or activities. Right? Where teams are focused on what? On the mission of the team, on the mission of the workplace, right? They have goals, activities. How do you become a part of a work team? You get hired. You sign a contract. You say, I will do this, and you will pay me this, and we will get along. And if one of us breaks that, then our relationship is broken. But how do you become a member of a family? You're born into it. How do you break it? You know, you get a court order, right? So those things. So family versus team. So we want teams. We want to be friendly like families, but we want to be goal oriented, because if we don't, people get confused and they get lazy. And you'll hear, this is how you know that people are getting these roles confused. Well, why did they get that shift? I've been here for 15 years. Seniority. I'm the oldest kid. I should get to have the longest stay up time, you know, right? That's the kind of language that gets used. So tenure as opposed to accomplishments become a problem, because we start thinking tenure says family. Team says demonstration of skills, right? So no, you don't get that shift, not because you don't get that shift because you haven't demonstrated the skills necessary to have that shift. Or we need your skills in this shift, more than we need them over here. So that's something that's important. Rules of power. So respect plus relationship equals, let me make sure I get that right. I have to remember that. Oh, okay. Sorry, I had to get so much stuff in my head. So relationship plus rules equals respect. So if you can write that down under rules of power. Relationship plus rules equals respect. Rules minus relationship equals rebellion. So when I gave the example of Jeff, I had the power, right? And the power was in what? My building what with Jeff? The relationship, right? So I knew what he was after, and I built a relationship that garnered what he was after with what I could provide, which was the structure, right? Now, is anyone familiar with the idea of banker's hours? Anyone ever heard of those? So what were banker's hours? Start late, leave early. You said 9 to 3. Okay. Do banks have banker's hours anymore? So what that meant was that, and what days of the week were those banker's hours? Monday through Friday from 10 to 3, right? Who did that benefit? It benefited the bank and the bankers. Why? Because what are the rest of us doing? We're working, right? So we can't get business done because of these bankers' hours. So this idea of gone fishing, one of the things we have to ask ourselves, are we operating with bankers' hours? Which means what? If we're operating with bankers' hours, who's that benefit? Us, right? So this idea of gone fishing, are we operating with systems that benefit us that don't necessarily benefit other people? Do you know what that's also called? What is that called? That's a system that operates like that, where it benefits themselves, because they set up the system. Starts with bureau and ends in bureaucracy. It's a bureaucracy. And if we're operating in that system and we're helping design that system, then we are a member of that bureaucracy system, which means we're a bureaucrat, right? Bureaucrat. So the other thing that we can do is to make sure that we have a clear vision. Right? And I believe, so I use this phraseology of understanding the vision and then standing under the vision. So what's the mission of the Met Council? What's the mission of your division? What's the mission of the body of humans that you're responsible for? What is the vision for that? And then does everyone not only understand it, but are they working under it, right, to help support it? And so that's another thing that becomes extremely crucial, particularly when looking at this cultural concept, because you can have different ways of approaching this thing as long as you're helping to support the overall vision. But that also means that you have to be clear about what that vision is. All right. And then lastly, this idea of the 4 agreements can be a buffer to change. So when we talk about this changing in an organization, it's important to understand these 4 agreements. And these are very Western in their demonstration, but I think they transcend, kind of Western society as well, right? So first, be impeccable with your word. Second, don't take anything personally because it's not about you, right? It's not about you. And don't make assumptions. So if you don't know, ask. And if you don't know what to ask, ask. I'm not sure how to ask this question. So here's an example. So we're driving through Starbucks, and my daughter sees a person that's in transition. I believe that he was a male transitioning into a female. And my daughter's at the point where she needs to know exactly what things are. Is that a boy? Is that a girl? And so she yells out the window, is that a boy or a girl? I wasn't prepared to even, engage in this conversation with my daughter, and I wasn't sure how to say it or phrase it. So I asked. It was the most terrifying thing, embarrassing thing you could do. But I said, how would you like to be addressed? And guess what the person did? They told me. And guess what I did to the kid? I told the kid how they want to be addressed, right? So, because what's our fear? Our fear is embarrassment, but nothing happens, right? Your face doesn't fall off. You don't, so there's that. If you go down to page 7, just want to hit this real quick. I don't want to waste your time. Yeah, there is a 7. Good, yes. So 7 is, here's a critical question to ask yourself, particularly when you approach different cultures. And sometimes we'll see it in our workplaces, or you'll hear people talk about all this stuff. Is there something wrong with minorities? And I use that terminology on purpose for a reason, to get a reaction, right? But how you answer that is important, because if there is something wrong with minorities, we need to get a vaccine, and we can fix them, right? Fix them. But if there's nothing wrong with people, then we have to start looking at our systems. Are there systems that create systems of inequity, right? I don't believe that there are poor people. I believe that there are systems that people are adapting to. Nobody buys a car at 23% interest unless they have to, right? So there's that. And then recognizing that bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination are centered in emotions and behavior. That bigotry is an emotion, and the only way to change an emotion is to bring a stronger emotion. And I suggest that stronger emotion is allophilia. And allophilia is just is positive regard, right? Positive regard is allophilia. And so, and then prejudice is a mindset. And when mindsets get frozen, then we get these prejudices. We get these judgments already made about someone before. And that discrimination is a behavior. And we can change our behaviors. Behaviors aren't frozen, they're not stuck. So there's that. On page 6, there are micro inequities and discretionary effort. So micro inequities are all those small things that aren't things you can prosecute. I can't prosecute. I can't take you to court on that. But they are things that are designed to minimize the human experience, right? And so, and they have direct impact on people's ability or willingness to give their best. And respect can never be earned. It can only be given. And it has to be given in the face of disrespect. Right? Is it easy to respect someone who's respecting you? Why, certainly. However, when someone's disrespecting you, that's when the real challenge occurs, right? So how do you show respect in the face of that? Page 8, just want to talk a little bit about this idea of the animal farm. And people get caught up with this idea of being oppressed or the oppressor, or having privilege or not having privilege. And I like to use this chicken metaphor as a way to talk about that. Anyone ever purchase organic eggs or free-range eggs or chicken? Anyone ever done that, right? what's their price point? It's exorbitant. It's pretty high. Their price point is high. And why is their price point so high? Because it costs more to produce. All right. What's that? Lower volume, right? So people are willing to pay more, right? And conventional chicken and eggs is typically lower. Why? Higher volume. What's that? Higher volume. What else? More demand. Cost of production is lower because of the volume, and people are willing to pay the lower cost, right? Yes.
So this is somewhat unique perception. I think it was maybe when I started having organic milk for 10 bucks a gallon, people were buying it. I don't know if it's something to buy about it. People were like, yeah, so $2 milk to be started $10. So the other question I have is, how do I know by the way that really was done? I mean, they put some sort of certification. How do you really know? I mean,
Right?
that it is really right.
No. Yeah.
I think it's better, so you're willing to pay more. But
Yeah.
it's better.
Right.
Is
Good.
the chicken really running all over the place? I don't know.
That's yeah. It is interesting to know the difference between natural foods and organic foods, right? Because they're not the same thing, right? Or naturally raised, or natural colors, or so those words are very interesting, right? So you raise a really good question. But my question is whether you have so-called privilege or not, right? Because the free-range chicken is perceived to be more privileged. It's raised more humanely, which I think is interesting. How do you raise a chicken more humanely? But that's a whole nother conversation, right? And then the traditionally caged chicken is raised in damp, not damp, but in tight quarters with lots of antibiotics and all sorts of stuff infused because of their proximity. And one might argue that they don't have any privilege, or they have little privilege at all. But in both cases, what is the purpose of those chickens and those eggs? To be eaten, right? So whether folks, if people aren't mindful, whether you have privilege or you don't have privilege, or you want to fight about who has privileges, if you don't pay close enough attention, you are the one that could be served up as a part of the system. All right. So it's important to recognize that we can spend a lot of time fighting among ourselves, but if we're not looking at the greater picture, then we can lose everything. And then on page 9, there's more of the 4 agreements. On page 11, I talk a little bit about, on 10, you can read some more about communication and how to interact with folks. And on page 11, I talk about this idea of being a servant leader. And servant leadership is very much about how do you use your gifts and your talents in the service of other people. Oftentimes when we think about leadership as that fish, right? That's out in front of everybody and everyone is following us. But what we know is the most effective leaders actually surrounded themselves with people and moved as people moved forward. And so that's an important concept when we talk about cultural competence. And then lastly, on page 12, on the backside of page 12, it's important for us to recognize that there's dignity and honor in being human, and that our context is extremely important, and that dignity is something that you can give and something that you have, that honor is the highest level of respect, and that none of us have done anything to bring ourselves here. We just accepted an invitation to be on this planet. And so we're trying to figure out what it means to be human. And human has 2 definitions. One is being a biped, having opposable thumbs, a big brain, and a belly button. If you ever encounter a person without a belly button, be concerned, right? And lastly, human is an adjective. So how do we want to be, or how do we like to be described as human beings? What are words we like to have attributed to being a human being? kindness, warm and caring, respectful. Chad, how would you describe a human being?
Alive.
Alive. Shaw? Compassion. Resilient. We make mistakes. So when we think about that, so what are some things that you can do to be more competent, more culturally competent? At the bottom are some suggestions. Get more. So learn history of your immigration story. Research family stories. Find names of family photos. Visit family homesteads. Tell your family story. Why, if I'm talking about learning about other folks, why must you learn about yourself? Why am I encouraging you to learn about yourself? Sue?
Well, because that's our, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like talking to so many people talking to my family, understanding my heritage, it's more than one nationality.
Yeah.
It's a big one, and so a lot of people who are new to the country or immigrants or whatever, they know their heritage is one, solid, most of for many, it's a solid heritage, and there's more to it than one. We lose a little bit because not because our we're random or whatever, but because we've lost that heritage.
And I would say, Sue, that is a perception too, right? Because being from Guatemala doesn't mean that we're all from the same tribe from Guatemala. Doesn't mean we all speak the same language, but the impression is there, right? That they have things, and that's one thing that I hope we leave with is that our commonalities and differences. Because we've had a point where we've been separated from our mothers because we've had to become independent beings, right? We couldn't live in there forever, right? That separation causes us to actually believe that we're more separate than we are to each other. Here's a great example. The Irish, right? Anyone heard my Irish story? Okay, because I don't want to bore anybody. So the Irish. So what is known about the Irish? What do we say about the Irish in the United States? What kinds of things get said about that? Oh yeah, they love to drink, right? So they have a whole holiday about drinking. What else about the Irish? They like to fight, right? The fighting Irish, right? So this is interesting. Has anyone ever really thought about why they drink? Or why they fight? Okay, so let's first talk about the second thing we know about fighting Irish, right? Fight. Who are the Irish fighting? The English. How long have they been fighting the English? Thousands of years, right? I mean, we'll go to hundreds, right? But no, they've been fighting the English for a long time. And how have they been faring? They've been getting their butt kicked for hundreds of years. Now think about this. You get your butt kicked for hundreds of years, constantly losing. How might you respond to that? A little defensively? You self-medicate. You've been a subjected people for hundreds and hundreds of years. You self-medicate. Now, what do we know about Irish people in Ireland? What was their lifestyle like? They were what? They lived off the land. They were nomadic people. They kind of did their thing and went over to another part of it and did another thing. But the English said, we can't have that. We have to put you on reservations. What do we say about Native Americans? Same thing. Why? For the same reasons. Wait a minute. You mean that the Irish and the Native Americans have a lot in common? Yes. But our separation allows us to think that these things are very different, and they're not very different. We're so much more connected and so much more alike than all of our family. Okay, so here's one. Think about a stereotype about another group. All right, are you holding that stereotype in your head? Just think about another. You don't have to say it. Just think about it. Now, I want you to take your hands and firmly place them on your family tree and shake. Do any of those people who have that stereotype fall out of your family tree? Those people are whatever. Those people are blah, 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 blah. They live off the system. They, da, 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 da. So our illusions of difference oftentimes create these barriers. And so I would submit, cut yourself some slack. You don't know everything. And everybody doesn't have stuff that you don't have, or because not everybody wants the same thing. And that's the and it's so funny because capitalism will make us think that everybody is after my stuff. Not everybody wants your stuff. That's why they make BMWs. That's why they make Hondas. That's why they make Toyotas. That's why they make Rolls Royces. I'll probably never own one, right? They make all these because people want different things. We don't all want the same thing. But if I can trick you into fear, I can make you think that people are after your stuff, or that your stuff is so limited that only you can have it. When in fact, we don't want the same stuff. We may in fact want different things. And if we want the same thing, then we compete for it, right? We compete, and the best person wins. So important stuff to think about. And lastly, on the back of page 12, a couple of things to also remember is assume nothing, develop friendships, be open about differences, don't hide from differences, encourage and ask questions. So be open to asking questions and being asked questions, right? So if we take offense, then people don't want to ask us any more questions, right? And then understand that mistakes happen and that no one person is a spokesperson for all. So let me get what's the woman's view on all of this, right? That doesn't work, right? Can you speak for all white guys there, Adam? Please, I want to know what they all think, right? That doesn't work, right? So recognize that. And then recognize that no ethnic or sexist joke is ever funny, right? Because if we start substituting, Oli and Lena jokes, right? We substitute blondes for that. It takes on a whole different kind of meaning. We substitute Jews for that, or Polacks, or Mexicans. It just, or blacks, or Jews, or whatever. It just takes on a whole different kind of thing. So just recognize that. If you just give me one more minute, I know I'm a minute over, but I just wanted to make sure that I hit all of the notes. So if you can go to your white pages and go over to comfort zones and bonsais. It's in the presentation, but I was talking too much. Oh, there it is right there. All right, so just really quickly, a bonsai tree, right? Anyone seen a bonsai tree? How are bonsai trees made? Constant pruning, right? Constant pruning. So they are shaped in the image of the person who's making the tree. What is the purpose of our comfort zones? Oftentimes our comfort zones keep us in a spot that makes us feel safe, right? And we think that it's giving us safety, significance, and belonging until it becomes too small for us to actually achieve our goals. So bonsai trees. So if bonsai trees are made in the image of the person who's creating them, if a bonsai tree was able to create a seed, what kind of seed would it create? Would it create a bonsai seed? No. It creates the original tree. So you can have a parent that's a bonsai who delivers a seed, and the seed grows up to be a regular tree, right? So we have to recognize the difference between our conditioning and the nature of who we are, right? So that's important. This last point, I'll just do this really quick, is this idea of intersectionality. So intersectionality is the culmination of all of our identities. We're not just one identity, but the complexity of our identities changes how we interact in a particular space, right? So I am Black, I am male, I am educated, and so that changes, and I don't have a felony, and that changes how I'm able to access things given those dimensions of myself. If one of those things changed, I'd have a different way that I could interact with society, right? So, for example, if I had a felony, right, I'd have to act or interact with the world differently than I do now. And so we call this that intersectionality. So here's a great example, and then after this, I will be done. Is like this pay equity thing, right? So typically when we talk about pay equity, how does that conversation happen? What do we talk about? We say a woman makes $1, a man makes $1 and a woman makes 78 cents, right? So that's the way we typically talk about that. However, it's much more complex when we start talking about intersectionality. Because if we add race to that intersection, it looks totally different, right? So here's an example. So when we add race into the mix, we recognize that European Americans, so let's say they make $48,000, Asian American, and these are all women, by the way. No, these aren't all women. I'm sorry. These are median incomes. But when we add race, it changes, right? So that adds another dimension. So that intersectionality becomes important when we add race into that mix, or gender, and that kind of thing. So if I'm interacting with the culture and I say, well, the Somali man responds to this like this, and blah, 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 and this is how I should treat him. Well, when I add the intersection of gender to that, how I respond to the Somali man and how I respond to the Somali woman is going to be vastly different because of the intersectionality, right? And then if I add age to that, or I add acculturation, did they grow up in the United States, or were they born in the United States and grew up here, or are they coming over? Do they immigrate here? That's another place of intersectionality. So that's it. I'm done. Thank you so much. I went a little bit over. I appreciate your tolerance for that. If you have any questions, comments, or observations, feel free to call me at any point, and I would love to see these teachbacks. So before we do the teachbacks, I just want to show you this last thing, which is how to put all the materials together on the head of one. And once I show you, if you can repeat it at your table, that would be great. So the most important thing is to create a structure by which you can organize and balance your nails, making sure that every part has its role. Every part has its role. You can do the impossible. So as you're on your way out, feel free to try that on your way out. But you can do the impossible. Thank you so much for the training. I appreciate it. And I don't think anybody fell asleep.